Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. You can donate a few bucks to the show in our tip jar at paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can become a recurring contributor in any dollar amount you would like at patreon.com/NorseCode. And remember, a $5 contribution or more will get you one of our sweet Norse Code bumper stickers. And before we get started, I want to say thank you to Matthew Adams from Switzerland, who threw $20 in the tip jar last week. Thank you very much, Matt. Adam. This is great.
Adam Matthews,
yeah. We appreciate your contribution, and we'll keep the lights on just a little bit longer with your $20 US. I'm your host, Dusty O'Connell. Joining me, as per usual, is Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human, Arif Hassan. How you doing, Arif?
Good, man. How are you?
I am excellent. Behind me is a freshly, well, I guess it's still brewing, but I busted out the old homebrew kit and started a batch of pale ale the other night. And it's just now beginning to ferment. I can hear the occasional bubble blurbling out of the airlock. So it's.
Oh, that sounds exciting.
I know. I got a beer, baby.
We've been meaning to get into home brewing. I think we're going to be super weird and hipstery about it and try to homebrew some wine. Not sure. But given that my girlfriend is a yeast scientist, I'm sure we'll come up with something fun and innovative.
Yeah, making wine is not that different of a process from making beer. And I don't know how well developed the homebrewing community is in Minneapolis. It's probably pretty good. You know, you guys got
it's
pretty serious
it's quite
brewing
active.
culture.
Yeah.
But no, I happen to live just a few blocks away from a fantastic place where they sell pretty much everything you could ever want for brewing beer or wine. And if you live in a place that's too small to brew and store your own beer, you can brew on their premises. Like, you can use their gear.
Oh,
they
that's
sanitize
amazing.
everything for you. You can bottle. It's kind of expensive, and one of the best reasons to homebrew is because 10 gallon or 5 gallons of beer ends up costing you like $50. But yeah, if you don't have the space or the desire to sanitize and maintain all your own equipment, you can just go there and pay to brew using their equipment, and you can pick your own recipe. You can either bring your own ingredients or buy them there, but we're doing it the old-fashioned way. We've got an all-grain pale ale happening right behind me here, so that's very exciting. In a few weeks, I will report. I'm actually thinking about naming it something Vikings related, because I have these sweet purple bottle caps.
Oh,
so
that's cool.
I gotta come up with some purple labels and some kind of Vikings
pale ales,
because it should be ready right as the season's wrapping up. We can drink it during the playoffs.
We should let's ask people what we should name it. But my advocacy is for purple pale ales.
Purple pale ale. All right.
Yeah. But yeah, if I were going to name the top 5 cities in terms of home brewing, I could probably name 3 of them. And I would say, or city areas, right? So probably Portland, probably Denver, probably Minneapolis, I think, are 3 of the cities that would probably be in the top 5.
Yeah, I would. Denver is maybe not in the top 5. I would say definitely Fort Collins or Boulder. Colorado, I think,
right,
is
the city area, the metropolitan statistical area. How about that? Which includes Boulder.
Okay, that's the Denver area, the Front Range. We'll say we'll include all the and we'll still manage to exclude a bunch of breweries, but Colorado is definitely ahead of the game as far as beer production per capita. But I definitely encourage you to start making your own wine, and then we can come up with a crowdsourced name for that as well.
Dope.
I love it. So we're halfway through the season, approaching the game against Washington, and halfway through the season, people who've listened to the show for the previous 4 years will be aware that we customarily do midseason awards. So should we do that before we do the let's do that before we talk Redskins. So we customarily start with the most valuable player, and since Tom Brady would just walk away with that every year, we tend to exclude quarterbacks from the MVP discussion.
Right, and I also think that most valuable player shouldn't be for the most valuable player, because it's always going to be a quarterback, and I think that makes it just a less interesting award. You should just choose who the best player is at a traditional football position. So you can still exclude like punters, kickers, maybe kick returners, and so forth, long snappers, right? But I think that the MVP award is better served by choosing the best player because we already have a best quarterback award. It's by getting the All-Pro recognition at quarterback. So I don't really want the MVP to always go to a quarterback. So for me, that means this year it's Aaron Donald, who I think right now is playing as the best player in football. He's got a better Defensive Player of the Year case than Everson Griffin, unfortunately, who is playing kind of out of his mind. But Aaron Donald at defensive tackle is doing more than most defensive ends are in terms of producing pressure, and he's really astonishing at stopping the run, even better than he was last year. He's really getting into peak J.J. Watt territory, which I thought was never going to happen. So I'm picking Aaron Donald.
I do not dispute that. Least valuable player. I thought this one was kind of funny. You've got Joe Flacco in the slot. So does this finally settle the question? Is Joe Flacco elite?
Yeah, he's in a rarefied position, untouchable in this category. So yeah, and least valuable player, always difficult to figure out because you can't just choose the worst player because he may not be hurting his team that much. So I got to pick a guy who's hurting the team the most. And in this case, it doesn't have to be a quarterback; it very much can be. But Joe Flacco is definitely the least valuable player. Because of the cap space he's taking up versus the production he's been putting forth, and his overall capability in helping the team win, just not good. If he was average, the cap production that he's taking up would be a problem. But he's like way below average, and he's taking up a lot of cap space. So Joe Flacco.
So I have a couple of thoughts, both quarterbacks. I feel so. Are injured players excluded from this? Because, I mean, if you want to talk about least value for cap space, I think Andrew Luck has to be part of the discussion, but that seems kind of like mean.
I think that's fine, actually. I think it's okay because they don't put him on IR yet, so his cap space still counts against the team, and he has hurt the team by virtue of the fact that they weren't going to be aggressive about getting a quarterback. This isn't necessarily, this is a your fault award, right? Which we'll get into later. It's not about whose fault it is, and it's not, I don't think it's, I mean, it is kind of a mean award to give, but I don't think it implies that the player who wins the award is necessarily at fault. So I think Andrew Luck is up there in the conversation, but I do think that the Colts have at least tried to get quarterbacks to fill in the position, so they knew that he was going to be gone, and he is taking up a lot of cap space, but Joe Flacco is persistent in his ability to stay on the field despite a back injury. And so they have been not very aggressive about getting a quarterback at all in order to fill that space. And so he has deterred improvements at play more than Andrew Luck has in my head.
Okay, so my other candidate for least valuable player is Eli Manning. And,
that's good.
Yeah, and my logic is that Manning has basically no team around him. Like all of his starting receivers are pretty much gone. They're super banged up, and they're hot garbage. Because Manning does not add any particular value to the team. Like when he wins a Super Bowl, it's because he's surrounded by phenomenal talent and remains extremely average. And when they go 1-8, it's because Manning is not capable of playing outside of himself or doing anything fantastic to lead his team anywhere. Especially when all of his weapons start dropping off around him. He's never going to be the guy that like steps up and makes an amazing play, like say, Russell Wilson.
Yeah, I would say that I think you're making a pretty good case. I think you're making a better case for someone who's overrated than someone who's necessarily the least valuable player. Joe Flacco is number 1 in 2017 cap hit rankings. Manning, very high, number 11. But Joe Flacco takes up the largest cap space of any player in the NFL right now. And I think he's playing worse than Manning. Manning is playing very poorly. I agree. And I think he's doing more to deter movement at the quarterback position than Manning is because they know he's going to retire soon. So they're still trying to get a quarterback. Final thought, Joe Flacco, if he was cut today, would incur a $53 million cap charge against the Ravens salary cap. If Manning was cut today, still way too large, but a $32 million cap charge. And so it's not nearly as bad. Joe Flacco takes up $25 million in cap space. Eli Manning takes up 19.7. So I think that Flacco kind of outdoes Manning in that area, but I think Manning is too well regarded more than Joe Flacco is.
All right. I'll
But
the honorable judge-o-meter will allow it. No applause necessary. Offensive player of the year. Well, it wouldn't be the NFL if Tom Brady didn't win something. So here's Tom Brady.
Yep. And for those thinking that this is an anti-Carson Wentz pick, fair, but not necessarily the case, because I think that Tom Brady is, doing a little more with a little less. And by a little less, I mean he's got the worst field position to work with, not necessarily worst skill players. They both have pretty good skill players, but I would argue that the Patriots have better skill players. But I think that they have a worse offensive line right now, and they've got just worse field position. I think they're, I'm not going to say dead last, but in the bottom 3 in terms of field position on offense. And the Eagles are sort of in the top 5 in terms of field position on offense. And so it's a little bit easier to score. It's a little bit easier to get into position to kick a good field goal or get a touchdown. And despite that, Tom Brady is putting up better statistics than Carson Wentz, which obviously is not an insult to Carson Wentz. He's like number 6 in the category. He's doing fine. But Brady is doing a lot to put the Patriots in competitive positions to win games, despite the 32nd ranked defense in the NFL. And he's producing a lot more. He's not going to win the MVP this year. I've said this a couple of times on this and other podcasts, because he gets evaluated against himself. And other quarterbacks get evaluated against everybody else. But I think Tom Brady is clearly the best offensive player this year. And, if Joe Thomas wasn't injured, he'd be sort of in this category, because they've been up against a pretty good slate of pass rushers, and he's done a good job. But he's injured. And I can't think of another offensive player that's doing nearly as well. Julio's not having as good of a year. Antonio's not having as good of a year. I don't think any running back is having as good of a year, mostly because Kareem Hunt has dropped off. And so in this case, I am resistant to picking quarterbacks because they get picked too often, but that doesn't mean you can't pick a quarterback if he's better at his position than everybody else is at theirs.
So for defensive player of the year, Aaron Donald, again, probably head and shoulders above everybody else. But since we've already given him MVP, if you were not going to pick Aaron Donald, who would you pick?
Yeah, I'd probably pick Calais Campbell. I don't think his PFF grade is higher at his position than anyone else, but you have to respect somebody who is going on I think Justice Mosqueda, who is also the North Code LVP, ended up saying something like Calais Campbell's on a Reggie White tear, which is a bit of an exaggeration. But Calais Campbell has produced more tackles for loss plus sacks than I think any defensive player in the NFL, and he's playing a more difficult position to do it at. He's a big part of the reason that Jacksonville is one of the best defenses in the NFL right now, and a big reason that Jacksonville is seriously threatening for the AFC South crown. Who would have thought? Oh, my God. So I'm going to give it to Calais Campbell because he is doing an extraordinary amount, both against the run and against the pass, from a position where it's a little bit more difficult to do those things. Just incredible work. There are other candidates. One of those candidates is going to win an award a little bit later on, so I'm not going to mention him. But, I do think we've got some pretty good play from a bunch of defensive interior players, so it's really difficult to pick one. I don't think, aside from the guy I mentioned, who we'll see later, anyone is putting up as good of a season in the secondary. Bobby Wagner's putting up a pretty good season at linebacker, and he deserves mention. And Harrison Smith obviously is putting up a fantastic season at safety, and he's worth mention. But I think Calais Campbell is playing better than both of them right now at his position.
So moving on to the league-wide coaching awards. Who's your pick for best offensive coordinator?
I don't know who the actual offensive coordinator by name is in Kansas City, but I know who it de facto is, and it's Andy Reid. Just phenomenal stuff. I think the mark of a good coordinator is knowing what to steal, and the mark of a great coordinator is knowing what to invent, and obviously calling the game correctly and doing all the other things. And Andy Reid is doing a good job of inventing offenses that people are doing a pretty good job of stealing, including, obviously the Philadelphia Eagles, the Minnesota Vikings. I think I've seen the Pittsburgh Steelers take some of it, and even the Seahawks, who kind of run their own version of a quote-unquote college offense, have been starting to take some of the Kansas City concepts. It's not just the shovel option. They're doing a lot of interesting things with their offensive line. They're doing a lot of interesting things with stuff behind the line of scrimmage that has nothing to do with kind of the play that's kind of taking over the NFL right now. But that does come into consideration. Plus, the Kansas City offense has been pretty stellar with Alex Smith at quarterback, who has kind of been, if you wanted to name an average quarterback, you'd name Alex Smith. Early on in the season, he was on an MVP type tear. Not quite the case anymore. Same with Kareem Hunt. Not quite the case anymore. But you have to respect somebody who has the ability to use all these weapons. Plus, getting Chris Conley and Albert Wilson involved in the game, who are not players that you would have expected to really have, very good seasons. So I'm going to give it to Andy Reid.
Yeah, no argument here. I mean, any team that can make Alex Smith look good is probably doing something right. And just the creativity and the mixed use of players on the offense, like you were saying, both at the line and behind the line of scrimmage, is I think you nailed it. I have nothing to add. Worst offensive coordinator, you've got Bill Lazor.
Yeah, so previously the Miami Dolphins offensive coordinator did a really poor job there too, unsurprisingly. Followed Paul Gunther back to the Bengals and is doing a really poor job coordinating this Bengals offense, which has an astonishing amount of skill players. Not a great offensive line, obviously, but an astonishing amount of skill players and an astonishing low amount of points. So I was trying to figure out who I would pick for this award. I didn't know who to pick. So I went to Pro Football Reference and sorted by points per drive, and I was like, well, the Cleveland Browns are dead last, but can you really blame the offensive coordinator for that? They've got just awful skill players, and they've got this guy who's just not ready to be a quarterback right now, and this weird running back thing where both of them are pretty good, but none of them are good enough to overcome stuff. So you kind of don't want to just give them too much crap for that. So the Miami Dolphins are right above that. The Chicago Bears are right above that. You want to give the Dolphins a little bit of a pass because they lost their quarterback. Chicago Bears have a rookie quarterback, and they don't have any receivers. But the Cincinnati Bengals don't really have much of an excuse. I understand that offensive line's really bad. The Vikings have dealt with a bad offensive line, but they also had a bad coordinator that exacerbated things. And I think that's what's happening here. They've got two running backs that are really good, in terms of catching the ball in Joe Mixon and Gio Bernard. And they keep on running them up the middle with this bad offensive line. They don't use A.J. Green correctly. They've got a couple of talented tight ends, both named Tyler, that they're not using very well. And it's really weird not to see players like John Ross and Tyler Boyd exploited at all. They're young and maybe they don't know the offense, but that's kind of on you for not teaching the offense very well and not finding limited plays where they can perform, kind of like Pat Shurmur's done with Laquan Treadwell this year. They're not even seeing the field. And so I'm gonna say it's the guy coordinating the Bengals offense, and I think I don't need to explain much more than that.
So for defensive coordinator, in the best slot, you've got Todd Wash.
Yeah, I didn't know who this guy was until I looked up the Jacksonville Jaguars defensive coordinator. That's that guy. Saxonville is currently leading the league in sacks. Appropriately enough, it's almost like they named him for that reason. And I believe, I'm going to double check right now, but I believe they're also leading the league in points allowed per drive. And it's Jacksonville. It's not a team that you expect to do very well. They're not only leading the league in points per drive, I just looked it up, they're doing it by a substantial margin. So right now, the most points allowed in points per drive is 2.17. The least points allowed is 1.13. So it's basically a 1-point spread, right? But Jacksonville at 1.13 is a whole fifth of a point, which is a pretty substantial margin, better than the Pittsburgh Steelers, which are number 2, which is 0.14 better than the Minnesota Vikings, number 3. And I think that for a team that had performed so poorly, despite how good we expect those players to be, the year before, for them to do so well this year, it really kind of speaks to how important it is to be able to utilize your players. They're leading the league in sacks by a pretty good margin. But it's not just that. They're pretty good at stopping the run. They're really great at stopping the pass, even when they're not pressured. They're doing a really good job of using Jalen Ramsey and Deshaun Gibson. And, even the linebacker core, which has always been kind of weird because they had Miles Jack, but also Paul Posluszny, whatever. They're doing a really good job making sure that defense can kind of overwhelm teams. Bit of an easy schedule, but the way that they're just so far ahead, I think means that, they don't pick, the defense doesn't pick who they play. They just have to play well against them, and they've done that.
Not a fluke, in other words.
Yeah.
For worst defensive coordinator, you've got Dom Capers, who I believe has won this award before.
Yeah, he might have even won it last year, not sure. But I feel like the Green Bay Packers have talented defensive players. Like that's not crazy, right? Like I think Demarius Randall, has shown up in games, and it's on the defensive coordinator to find ways to create consistency. I think that that defensive line has continuously produced people who can rush the passer, and it's on them to not be able to exploit that effectively. I think they've gotten worse at defending the run. I think they've gotten worse at utilizing like the 80 defensive backs that they've had. They're leading the league in points allowed per drive, tied with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But I thought that the Green Bay Packers had more talent on defense than the Buccaneers do and than the Raiders do. And so it's on Dom Capers to be able to use that effectively. They don't have to be a good defense with this defensive talent because they've got some issues at linebacker, and not everybody in the defensive back core is all that great. But they're the worst in the league, and they should be better given how much talent they have.
I would submit Dennis Allen of the Saints for honorable mention in that category, but otherwise, I have very little to add.
Well, the Saints are in the second half of the first half of the season have suddenly turned up an amazing defense. So first half of the season, just terrible defense. Second half of the season, amazing defense. So
we'll revisit that at the end of season awards. We'll see if it's just a blip.
Right.
In the best head coach category, of course, Bill Belichick stands head and shoulders above all as the best coach of all time. I read an anecdote about how the Patriots are hanging out in Colorado Springs practicing in advance of their Mexico City game because the training facility near Colorado Springs is within a few feet of the altitude in Mexico City, which is, it turns out Mexico City is pretty high up there. It's like 7,000 feet.
Yeah, it's 2,000 feet higher than Denver.
Yeah.
So that's super smart. Holy crap, training near Pikes Peak. Colorado Springs sucks as a city, but that's not the Patriots' fault. It's a great tourist city. I loved visiting, but I would hate living there.
Well, there's a bunch of really phenomenal touristy things to do nearby. It's a very beautiful spot, but you know how the old saw is that if you ever see like a Martin Luther King Jr. drive, you should avoid it because that's probably like not the best neighborhood.
Right.
I feel like the same rule applies to any city that has a Ronald Reagan Expressway.
That's fair.
It is probably a harbinger of a particular type of, culture that is maybe not the most conducive to effective public services.
Right. I mean, everyone who listens to this podcast kind of knows our political leanings, and just know that like Focus on the Family and a bunch of affiliated organizations set up at Colorado Springs. The Air Force Academy is there, which isn't inherently a bad thing, but it speaks to the services that the town provides, which is it's mostly a college town that serves a bunch of these nonprofits as well as Air Force Academy and I think the University of Colorado, or Colorado State.
No, Colorado College.
Colorado College. That's it, Colorado College. So it's like whatever, but it's a great place to visit and really smart of Bill Belichick to head up there. But we can't give this award to Bill Belichick every single year. Plus, that defense isn't as good as it should be given the talent. And I know a lot of that's on Matt Canada, which is an amazing name. But a lot of that's on Bill Belichick because he has a defensive background and gets really involved in every aspect of the game. Probably would still give it to him, but given that there's leeway and given that we can't just give it to him every year, I'm going to give it to Doug Peterson of the Eagles, who have a top 5 defense and probably a top 5 offense. They're doing it without great skill players on offense. They've squeezed a lot of talent out of players like Carson Wentz, of course. They just traded for Jay Ajayi, and they're using him pretty well. Don't get credit for the trade, but get credit for using a player to get more value out of him than he ever had in his original situation. I mean, just that defense. Like I know a lot of that's Jim Schwartz, but I think the head coach gets a lot of credit for that. Plus, that secondary has turned around a lot. Jalen Mills is playing a lot better. You get to pair that with a talented but injured-ish linebacker core and a great defensive line. Doug Peterson for sure. They might be the best team in the NFL right now. So giving this award to the best team in the NFL seems pretty intuitive.
Well, so I think honorable mention, because I agree with all that, but I think honorable mention should go to Tom Coughlin down in Jacksonville because for a lot of the same reasons.
But he's not the head coach. He's straddling the line between a coach and a front office member. That's technically Doug Marrone, which is weird.
Well, All right, but and that's another reason why he shouldn't get it. But I think a lot of the stuff that you were saying about Todd Wash and the Jaguars applies.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. And I think Tom Coughlin has a big role to play in helping turn the Jaguars around. So definitely fair, I think, to nominate him in the cat, especially because what is his position?
If there was a most improved mystery coaching position award, then Tom Coughlin would win it hands down because the organization looks so much more effective than it has in previous years, and I think that's largely due to having competent coaching and I guess competent sort of front officing. I don't know.
Yeah, because he's not scouting players. I don't know what he does. It's weird.
Whatever he's doing, it's working, and he should keep doing it. Is the point? For worst head coach, this one is pretty obvious. Ben McAdoo is if the Giants were the type of team that would fire a coach mid-season, then McAdoo would probably already be packing his bags.
Yeah, they've got talent on defense. They had one of the best defenses in the league last year. They didn't lose a ton of guys, and this defense is playing really abysmally. Eli Manning, for as much as I think he's overrated, he's significantly overrated. He should be playing better than he is. And before everyone got injured, before all those receivers got injured, they were still playing really poorly on offense. Plus, it took them forever to realize, which running back they should go with, and even then, it's not doing enough. That offensive line, I think that it's a lot of it's on the coaches for trusting the bad players too much and not giving backups more of a chance. But also, last year they did a good job of hiding the offensive line with their play calling. This year they're not. And I think a lot of that has to do with Ben McAdoo. It's got a ton of talent on defense, sufficient talent on offense, and they're just a bad team.
He just doesn't seem like he knows what he wants to do with his team. After he had another loss last week, McAdoo was like, we might let another guy, get a few reps at quarterback, see what we got, but maybe not, probably not actually. That might make Eli mad. So I just don't really know what we're gonna do. Which
plus,
is not
anybody who's scared of making Eli Manning mad. Come on.
I know you'll get the Eli Manning frown. Breakout player this year, I like your choice. You've got Jared Goff, who I think everybody was kind of poo-pooing last year, but this year has, and especially now that the Thursday night game claimed approximately half of the starting Seattle Seahawks.
Right.
I think the Rams are in a position to dominate their division, and Jared Goff is a big piece of that this year.
Right, and he's been super inconsistent. I'll definitely admit that. And if it doesn't sustain itself, then it probably should go to Carson Wentz. But the reason I chose him over Carson Wentz, besides my bias, is that I think Goff had the overall improvement from Goff was greater than it was for Carson Wentz, who improved from below average to significantly above average, whereas Goff improved from one of the worst quarterbacks of all time, one of the worst quarterback seasons we've seen in years, decades even, to significantly above average. Not as good as Wentz, but a bigger improvement step, I think, for him. Again, really inconsistent. He's had four phenomenal games, and in 3 or 4 whatever games, but nothing catastrophic, right? So it's not the type of inconsistency that's just going to sink you or anything like that. So maybe as the season changes, we'll have to pick someone else. But for right now, I think Jared Goff is a pretty good candidate because of how exciting that offense is.
Well, and offensive rookie of the year, though he has not done much for your Norse Code Fantasy League team, is pretty clearly Kareem Hunt, even despite the recent drop off in performance.
Right, and as the season progresses, maybe things change. But if you only look at who has done well as a rookie on offense in the first half of the season, and assume Game 1 is as important as Game 7 or Game 8, then I think you have to pick Kareem Hunt. So that might change as the season progresses. But right now, I think Kareem Hunt is playing better than any other rookie on offense by a pretty significant margin. Obviously, none of the offensive receivers are doing very well. Cooper Kupp could have been in that conversation, but he's kind of dropped off along with Jared Goff as the season progresses. So we'll see how that goes. And you're left with players like Tariq Cohen and Dalvin Cook, who is injured, and all that. So I'm not saying Kareem Hunt is winning by default because he's he's putting together a performance that would compete with any offensive rookie of the year candidate. Certainly he would beat, Teddy's 2014 season, for example. But it makes it clearer to pick him despite a recent drop-off in performance.
Okay, so let me ask you this. If Dalvin Cook weren't injured, do you think that he would be a bigger part of this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, assuming Dalvin was playing at the level that he played before he was injured consistently, his recent performances would have been better than Kareem Hunt's recent performances, and we'd have more of a conversation. I still think that Kareem Hunt would just edge him out, but I think it would be definitely an exciting and interesting conversation to have. The only other player that I'd include in this conversation, and he just did not begin the year with that much production, so maybe he will by the end of the year if Kareem Hunt continues to sort of middle out, would be Evan Ingram at tight end. But yeah, Dalvin Cook would win it over Evan Ingram at this point in the year, and he would certainly be in the conversation, especially if you recency adjusted these things, over Kareem Hunt. But I still think Kareem Hunt, just on virtue of just how phenomenal those first couple of weeks were, would still win the award.
So, defensive rookie of the year, again, pretty obvious. In fact, I think it was Brett Coleman who posted on Twitter.
Yeah, fantastic video by Brett Coleman. Yeah.
I've been watching game film, and I just have to do a breakdown of this guy because he's just having a crazy great season. Marshawn Lattimore.
Yeah, so he's having a season that puts him up against some of the best cornerback seasons we've had. Not for a rookie, period. Brett Coleman mentioned the 2006 Champ Bailey season, out of this world, right? Another season to maybe compare it to is the 2009 Darrelle Revis season. I think both of those seasons were better, so it's not like we're saying it's as good as.
But he's a rookie.
What's that?
But he's a rookie.
Yeah, but he's a rookie. So it doesn't matter if you're quibbling between well, I don't know if he was as good as 2013 Richard Sherman. Who cares?
I don't know if he's the best of all time yet. It doesn't matter.
Right. He's doing a phenomenal job, and he's playing better than a ton of veterans. And Brett Coleman outlines why. I think he might be leading the league in yards allowed per cover snap. Not sure, but he's up there. He's playing better than Xavier Rhodes is right now. He's playing better than Patrick Peterson is right now, and that is wild. So he's the guy that I would have said has a candidacy in Defensive Player of the Year. But he's not, he's not playing as well as Aaron Donald, but he's playing a lot better than some of the other candidates. Maybe sort of at the Bobby Wagner level, but at cornerback, right? Just incredible stuff. He wins it running away. Not even close.
Next up, Comeback Player of the Year. We talked about this a little bit before the show, and we established for anyone who's still a fan of the show, Louis, Jack Dahl in the 3-part episode where Louis gets a shot to host the Tonight Show is one of the greatest supporting characters of all time, played by David Lynch. And one of his rules of showbiz is that you have to go away to come back. And so the Comeback Player of the Year award is reserved for somebody who actually was good at one point and then sucked and then came back to be good. And we decided that the longer that a player was not good is actually an enhancement for the award if they're good now. And with all that in mind, you pick Jimmy Smith.
Yeah, I think he's in the conversation right now as a top 5 corner. I think he is also playing better than Patrick Peterson and Xavier Rhodes, for example. He's one of the top corners. No one's talking about him. We mentioned him in our Ravens preview with Derek Klassen. Or not Derek Klassen, Dylan Bishop. My bad. Getting the D names of draft Twitter mixed up.
There's just so many guests with D names.
Right. And he's continuing to play that well. He's played in the slot. He's played on the outside. He follows corners. He follows receivers everywhere. And he's having a phenomenal season. Last season, he wasn't that great. The season before, he was abysmal because of injury. The season before that, he was playing at a Pro Bowl level. So he was a great player that's been off for 2 seasons. A lot of it's injury related. And now he's back to performing as one of the best corners in the NFL, maybe even better than he was before. And so people need to talk about him more. He's doing a fantastic job. He has a candidacy for an all-pro spot, and he's certainly a Pro Bowl lock at this point.
So let's turn our attention to the Vikings portion of the midseason awards. Starting with, I'm curious to hear your justification for this, but starting with MVP for the Vikings, you've got Pat Shurmur.
Yeah, I think so. I think what he's done in this offense is nothing short of phenomenal. The fact that he was able to design an offense that's adaptive, I think, to what's happening with opponents, throwing deep against the Saints, throwing short against the Bears. He's doing a really good job of figuring out what the offense needs to do. Not only is he adapting to the opponents, he's adapting to just the mercurial player situation in Minnesota. Is Case Keenum playing? Is Sam Bradford playing? Doesn't matter. They'll figure something out to generate points. Stephon Diggs is out. Doesn't matter. We'll figure a way to generate points. Dalvin Cook is out. Doesn't matter. We'll figure out a way to generate points. Doing a really good job of putting the team in a position to win. I think more than any individual offensive player. Thielen obviously is having a great season. Diggs was doing really well. Jerick McKinnon is doing a pretty good job. Dalvin Cook obviously was the most talented player on offense when he was healthy, aside from Stephon and Adam. Great great work from Riley Reif and Mike Remmers of all people. They all play a role, but more than that, creating the system in which that role occurs in and is adaptive to all of the changes on offense and is adaptive to the different defenses they're going. I mean, it's been different offensive styles against different teams based off of what they see, and you like to think that that's what offensive coordinators generally do, but they very often don't. So Pat Shurmur, I think, deserves recognition. But if you weren't going to pick a player, if you can only pick a player because it is the least or the most valuable player award, I would pick Linval Joseph. I think he's more important to the defense than any other player. Everson Griffin is having a fantastic season. Xavier Rhodes is playing pretty well. Anthony Barr is playing lights out again. Harrison Smith is playing at an all-pro level, should be an all-pro safety. But I think the defense suffers more without Linval Joseph, despite the fact that he plays fewer snaps, because of how they set up those third and long situations, because of what he does from first and second down.
Yeah, he really seems like the linchpin to the rest of the defense, and really enables players like Smith and Griffin to do some of the crazy gadgety things that they do.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, rushing Harrison Smith off the edge on third down, that's not typical. It's not quite atypical either. But rushing him off the edge on first and second down, a lot of that, you have to be able to trust your run defense to be able to do that. And the way that you do that is by having, Linval Joseph take up two blockers so that they can't automatically run when Harrison Smith is on the edge. And he gets the ability to get those tackles for loss or sacks, based off of what they'll do. Absolutely he enables that gadget stuff. And then also, when the Vikings do blitz, not just Harrison Smith, but, the linebackers or whatever, and teams check to passing in the flats, they have to force Anthony Barr, Eric Kendricks to run to the flats. And in order for that to happen, you need to be able to prevent those offensive linemen from getting to the second level. And Linval Joseph does a phenomenal job of that as well. So, he really enables the rest of the team to do what they do best.
So moving on to least valuable player,
This one was hard.
I can see what you've written, and I want you to explain yourself.
Yeah. Okay, so my pick was Sam Bradford.
Boo!
But okay, just like the Andrew Luck thing, I'm not picking people on. Like, I'm not saying it's his fault. It's not. It's clearly not his fault. He's a good player playing in a system designed for him. He would have been potentially in the conversation. It's not like he would have played at the same level that he did in the season opener for the rest of the season, but he could have potentially been in the MVP conversation. He's accurate. He's a good deep ball thrower. But his injury before he got on injured reserve. So this is important because this is a midseason award. It takes into account the cap hit that he incurred against the Vikings while he was on the active roster despite not being active. And his cap hit was like $18 million. It's much higher than almost anyone else in the Vikings. And so it restricted the ability of the Vikings to go after players in the offseason, which, wasn't a huge issue. The Vikings are a good team right now. But it makes him a least valuable player. But one of the reasons I had to fish around and look for him was because there's not really many good candidates for least valuable player. Like, that's part of it, too. The Vikings are a very sort of complete team, and the areas where they're deficient are areas where the Vikings have just not put a lot of resources, so they're not really hurting the team in a significant way. Plus, some of the worst players are players where it's not as big a deal. So Pat Elflein, for example, is a really inconsistent player at center, but he's doing really good things for the team too. He's just, kind of allowing a lot of pressure. He's not doing a great job against nose tackles, against the run, and it's causing some problems, but it's not causing a ton of problems. So, Pat Elflein, maybe he's hurting the team on the field worse than the absence of Sam Bradford is, because Case Keenum is playing pretty well, relatively speaking. But, it's not causing a huge issue in terms of resource management. The other, players that I might have considered, Kyle Rudolph takes up a ton of cap space. He's been okay. He's improved as a run blocker, but he's not good at run blocking, and he's not that effective of a pass catcher. And he takes up a lot of cap space. So if you wanted to pick somebody on the field, it could be him. I initially said Trey Waynes. He's not playing super well, even though he's improved over the past couple of weeks. He's not playing very well, but he doesn't take a ton of cap space up. And it's very clear that he hasn't prevented the Vikings from acquiring defensive backs, because they did acquire, Terrence Newman first, and then they acquired Mackenzie Alexander, and then they acquired Tremaine Brock, who, despite the fact that he didn't play well when he was on the field, is a good example of how the Vikings have still been able to find, reasons to go and get a player to see, what happens if Trey Waynes underperforms. So he hasn't been hurting the team from a cap perspective. He hasn't been hurting the team from a deterring the ability to find talent perspective. And even though, opposing teams throw him at him a lot, I mean, he might be the weak link on the defense, but, it's the defense is good. How bad is that really? So it's probably Kyle Rudolph or Trey Waynes, but it's not that big a deal. I guess Kyle Rudolph. But if you really wanted to kind of drive it deep, Sam Bradford.
Well, so I think there's someone you didn't mention that I think deserves at least consideration or honorable mention, and that's Latavius Murray. And maybe this is just me building up expectations in my head before the season started and then having them dashed when Dalvin Cook went out injured. But, I imagined a super effective, three-headed hydra of a run attack this year. And, Murray was sold to us as a great third down and goal line back. And it seems like he's not really being used in that role. And the role that he's being used in leaves him only minimally effective.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to pick Latavius Murray, especially because, he's overpaid right now as a running back. I think he's got $5 million of cap hit. He's got $5 million next year of cap hit as well. And that's pretty high for a running back. And he's not performing as a high, not high, but somewhat highly paid-ish running back. But I tend to think that Latavius Murray is actually doing fine. I know his yards per carry is really low. And I know he's just not an explosive playmaker. But his success rate based off of the plays that he's in on is actually somewhat high. And if you adjusted his yards per carry for the down and distance that he's carrying them from, which I think is a really important thing to do in order to evaluate running, he's actually kind of middle of the league. And so that makes him slightly overpaid. And, he clearly didn't prevent the Vikings from, drafting Dalvin Cook. And the Vikings, got Mac Brown and they promoted Bronson Hill at one point. They're okay with Latavius Murray because he's not crowding out other running backs. And I think he's actually performing okay. Not well, but okay. And so his yards per carry numbers are poor. His total yardage is poor. His touchdowns are poor. But I think within the context of the role that he's in, he's doing fine. So that's why I didn't pick him.
All right. So looking at Offensive Player of the Year so far, you have a what I believe to be a rather curious choice, and this just might be because I have him in 2 fantasy leagues, and I have found his performance to be lacking. But you've got Adam Thielen in the slot.
Yeah, I mean, all the Vikings receivers have been inconsistent in terms of their game-to-game production, but he's the best offensive player that's been the most available, right? Dalvin Cook's played better, Stephon Diggs plays better. That's true. But Adam Thielen has contributed more to the offense. And I think he saved a lot of Case Keenum's errant passes, and he deserves credit for that. And I think he's kind of what's making the passing game going more than any other player. So it's not a default award because he's playing as a top 10-ish, top 15-ish receiver. But because the more talented players are not playing, I have to pick him.
Well, so this may be you can accuse me of recency bias if you want, but what about Jerick McKinnon?
Yeah, I mean, if he put up this performance throughout the entirety of the season, yeah, I would pick him. But the first half of the season, I got a bunch of tweets about how bad Jerick McKinnon was for a reason. He was just not performing well. Even if we only restricted to the offense, I mean, his yards per carry was low. It was only 10 carries as well, right? Which speaks to his usage. And that's not his fault. That's Dalvin Cook's, because Dalvin Cook was playing well. And he was, a fine pass catcher, but he dropped some passes early in the season. That was kind of frustrating. He has done really well in 3 of the 4 past games. But 3 games out of 8, I don't know if I can count it.
All right. So moving on to Defensive Player of the Year. This one is pretty clear. We've got Harry Smith for doing everything everywhere to everyone all the time.
Yeah. The more valuable player to the Vikings defense is Linval Joseph, but the best player on the Vikings defense is Harrison Smith. Everywhere, everything, all the time. Pass rusher, defender, run stopper, freeing anything. What does a defensive player do? He does that, right? He's even improved in man coverage, right? He's phenomenal, and he allows the Vikings to play a variety of defensive coverages. They can play cover 3 with a single high safety. They can play cover 1 with a single high safety. It can be Harrison Smith. They can also play cover 1 with Harrison Smith at the robber position, or at the at the second level with the linebackers. That's fine. He knows how to do that. They don't have to go into dime when there's 4 receivers on the field, because evidently, even though he was just awful at it in training camp and was a weakness coming out of the draft, he's evidently fine in man coverage. It's where he got one of his picks this year. And picks are just more difficult to get in man coverage. And he's been great at stopping the run. He's been great at rushing the passer. He's the best pass rushing safety in the NFL this year. Plus, over the past 4 years, he's good.
Harrison Visa Smith is everywhere you want to be.
Everywhere you want to be. That's good. I like that.
So for Rookie of the Year, it's annoying, because the injury thing and, just kind of like average performances. But, that's kind of common for the Vikings. Remember when we had to struggle to figure out where to put Laquan Treadwell in the Midseason Awards? But you've got Dalvin Cook.
Right. This is a default award, right? Dalvin Cook is the only rookie that's been consistently playing well. And he does get, demerits for not being on the field, unfortunately. But I can't reasonably pick Pat Elflein, who has just played really poorly in stretches, plays really well in other stretches, right? I'm not saying he's going to be a bad player, but he hasn't played well enough right now to earn that award, I think, from the Vikings. And then Ben Gideon just doesn't see enough snaps, has been out of position sometimes, pretty good otherwise, but has been out of position sometimes, just doesn't play that many snaps. And Jaleel Johnson doesn't play that many snaps. And, there's not really many other rookies to pick. Every team only has a couple of rookies that they can evaluate. And this year for the Vikings, that's true. Still seems like it was a pretty good draft class for the Vikings, certainly better than last year. But, without a standout that's healthy, I have to pick Dalvin Cook.
So now to the Most Improved Award over the previous season. This is not like the Comeback Player Award.
Right. Yeah. So you can win the award if you've never been good. You can win the award if you were good previously. And it's only over one season as opposed to over a career. Otherwise, Andrew Sandeo would just win the award. But it's Anthony Barr, because this year he's playing really well. He's playing as a top 10-ish outside linebacker, doing a really good job stopping the run, doing a better job, actually tackling instead of missing tackles, doing a great job rushing the passer, and actually doing a pretty good job even in pass coverage. Hasn't been targeted that much in pass coverage, which I think is a credit to him. So he's playing, top 10-ish. He was one of the worst outside linebackers in the league last year, so huge improvement. I almost picked Trey Waynes for this award because he was just so abysmal 2 years ago. He was so abysmal last year, and he's been doing okay over the past couple of games. But I think the overall improvement from Anthony Barr's level of play to his current level of play is way bigger than Trey Waynes' improvement in level of play.
Yeah, I was thinking Trey Waynes, but again, recency bias. And like you said, he went from truly generationally bad to not bad.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. He went to not bad.
So the last award, and a relatively difficult one to pick, and which I think is a credit to the coaching staff and the team in general, is the Most Worser Award. Again, since last year.
Right. So I'm taking a look at these players, and it's tough. Like, you look at the offensive players, who has gotten worse? I can't think of a player who's gotten worse on offense. Adam Thielen's improved. Stephon Diggs has improved. Laquan Treadwell has improved, obviously. Kyle Rudolph maybe got a little bit worse. Not that big a deal. Joe Berger definitely got worse, but not by much. And if we wanted to count performances for other teams, Riley Reef and Mike Remmers got better, right? Pat Elflin's a rookie, so he does not qualify for the award. Nick Easton has been playing at kind of the same level, which is kind of a worrisome level, and maybe he even got a little bit better, right? Case Keenum got a lot better. Devin Cook, it doesn't count. Jerick McKinnon has been fine. Latavius Murray wasn't good for the Raiders. So I can't really pick anyone on offense. And on defense, I mean, it's a great defense, right? Anthony Barr got better. Everson Griffin got better. Linval Joseph's playing at the same level. Tom Johnson got better. Danielle Hunter, maybe he got worse, but like, it's not like... The thing about Danielle Hunter, when we had Eric Eager on the podcast, he mentioned this too, is that Danielle Hunter was due for regression, not because of any level of play, but because he got a lot of unblocked sacks last year and had a really unusually high pressure to conversion ratio on sacks. He's getting pressure. He's stopping the run. He didn't get worse. Xavier Rhodes got a little bit worse, but it doesn't feel like he got worse enough to qualify for this award. Harrison Smith's playing at the same level. Andrew Sandeo got better. Trey Waynes obviously got better. Mac Alexander got better. Terrence Newman, maybe he did get worse, but not as bad as I thought he would. So it's Eric Kendricks. He's not bad. He's playing well. But he was at a Pro Bowl level last year. I would not vote for him for the Pro Bowl this year. He's missed too many tackles, which is kind of his calling card, making tackles. He has been a little bit worse in coverage, so I have to give it to Eric Kendricks.
So for me, it's kind of hard to separate a player who just doesn't see as many snaps because they're not as good. And it kind of goes back to the thing we were talking about last week, the embarrassment of comfort we have at so many positions where we can, kind of keep guys. We actually have a choice now. We can keep guys in who are doing well and kind of reduce the number of snaps that players see when they're not performing well. But I think Jarius Wright has seen his role relegated to primarily special teams, and he doesn't really get rotated into the receiver spots as much because he just isn't as good. Or maybe it's that other people are better and he's about the same. But either way, I think he deserves honorable mention for most worser, or at least more invisibler for 2017. Yeah.
And we saw him a lot last year, especially on crossing routes as a third receiver. But like Laquan Treadwell's emergence isn't necessarily his fault, and he's played well when he's been on the field. But Jarius Wright just hasn't seen the field all that much this year, and you have to at least think about his role this year versus his role last year when considering this award. But again, this award is not about fault necessarily. It's about level of performance, and I think if you combine like level of performance and overall play, he's in consideration. But I think generally he's been pretty good on the field, and so I would definitely place him at least second or third with Eric Hendricks at the top.
Well, good. So I'm not crazy.
Yeah, I get the reasoning. I think he's playing well, but his role is significantly reduced, and you have to take that in consideration. Yeah.
Well, if I am crazy, then that's not why, and I will accept that.
Right, yeah.
So that's your Norse Code Midseason Awards, the 5th Annual Midseason Awards. We will be mailing a Vikings in London coaster for each player that won the award, which, if they even open, will probably go directly in the garbage.
Right.
The value of our awards. But congratulations to everybody who won, and to everybody who won the least valuable and most worser awards. Step it up, guys. Come on.
Okay, come on.
This is not a joke.
Damn it, Sam Bradford.
Just the worst. So before we tackle the preview of the Washington game, there's a couple of news items to highlight. But first, can we just talk about the Thursday night football game just for a minute or two? What the heck was that?
I was going to take a nap instead of watching it, and then I ended up watching it because I can watch it on Amazon, and I didn't have to go all the way downstairs.
Well, first of all, what the heck is that? I also watched it on Amazon Prime because we had Technology is so confusing. We have
Is that like a weird thing to say? Yeah, I got the game on Amazon Prime. What?
what? It is super weird, and so I think that's like part of the reason that NFL ratings are, you know, quote unquote down this season, because, you know, half the games, like, so every game except for one, every Thursday night game except for one is on Amazon Prime, of all places. And last week was the game that was not on Amazon Prime, so that was disappointing. I don't know why that is. That's a Byzantine rule that escapes me. And like, I can't see NFL games, especially Thursday night games, being the reason to get Amazon Prime. Like, I just have Amazon Prime because I buy a lot of crap on Amazon, and I like having free shipping, and I like being able to pay $6 for a giant box that I can fill with like toilet paper and industrial size packages of laundry detergent and dishwasher detergent, and just have mailed to my house instead of having to like battle traffic and stuff, you know, once every few months to get it. I mean, it sure beats going to Costco, but
Then it fits in the same theme, right? It's like, oh, this is convenient. I don't have to go to my TV.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like a bonus. You know, all of Amazon Prime Video is a bonus to me, because none of it is the sort of thing that I would, you know, commit to for that purpose. And, you know, we don't have rabbit ears on our living room TV because we're like weird cord cutters and technology is confusing. So, hey, I'll watch the game on Amazon. And then when I am on Twitter the whole time, like having a great big Nickelodeon nostalgia party, it's like seeing into the future, because whatever happens, like happens 8 seconds later on my TV. And then I get to, you know, cheer along knowing what's going to happen.
I thought I would hate it, and I don't.
It's
I thought I would hate that Twitter would spoil like 8 seconds of the game, and I don't. Now I know what to look at.
Well, yeah, exactly. And we're capable of enjoying things when we know the outcome. We're not babies about spoilers. We are grown-ass adults. However, most of those 8-second spoilers were about horrific injuries to star players.
Yes.
Earl Thomas came out and said that Thursday night games, quote, should be illegal.
Wait, so I always like feel like Thursday night games do cause more injuries. The data that we have don't indicate that. The data that we have indicate that Thursday night games cause the same level of injuries or within the margin of error. I think that's a sample size thing. I think that the margin of error thing is just like, it has to be high because the sample size is so low. So I do think that they probably cause more injuries. And then the objective methods we have for determining quality of play, which include the number of penalties called, which include how close these games are, which includes how high leverage plays, how many high leverage plays there are in the fourth quarter. Those also indicate that Thursday night games are no different. But I don't really care about that. I do think that they're subjectively just worse games. And I do think that they do increase the risk of injury. And the only reason that it's not showing up in the data, aside from the sample size exploding what a reasonable margin of error is because we tend not to play good players who are at higher risk of injury in those Thursday night games, which also further reduces the quality of play. Because there are some college games where you've got a bunch of high leverage plays in the fourth quarter where it's a close game and there's not that many penalties and it's abysmal because the players aren't good. And I'm okay with that. Amy Trask outlined like a 5-step plan of what she would do if she were commissioner. All 5 steps are amazing. If you have a Thursday night game, you get a bye before it, and probably just eliminate Thursday night games entirely. You have 2 bye weeks. Everybody gets a bye week after an international game. Every team has to participate in a neutral site game. Just really good stuff.
Yeah, and to me, like, you should be able to trust the players, right? I mean, they're the ones that are going out there on short rest after a short week, and it seems like every week a high-profile player is like, we hate playing Thursday night games because they suck.
Yeah. Every player, all the time. Every coach, all the time. Like, they suck. It even sucks for the broadcasters because they can do less homework if they're the type of broadcaster who does homework before the game. Plus, a lot of them also have to prep for the Sunday game. And so it divides their prep. So it sucks for everybody.
Well, Bill Barnwell had an interesting take on the situation where the Thursday night game exists partly as leverage for the players union and the CBA. Like, you get rid of Thursday night games, but we'll give you this other thing that, tilts the balance of power even further towards the owners.
Right. Yeah. What I found interesting was that somebody said that Thursday night games, if you got rid of them, it would eliminate $7 million off the cap, or $150,000, I think, per player. And I don't think that's quite a fair accounting. All it does is take a look at the revenue generated on Thursday night games. Doesn't take into account the replacement revenue generated from when you would actually put the game. And it doesn't account for the long-term effects of increasing the overall quality of play on viewership, because I think low-quality play does, in fact, deter viewership no matter what the NFL thinks. And so, directly speaking, I can understand that argument, but that does mean that they would get leverage, and that's actually a really good argument, that like Thursday night games exist as a means of creating a bargaining chip that the players have to pay to get rid of, which sucks because it's the weakest union in sports.
It's remarkably cynical. But I think I'm going back to the Amazon thing. I think part of it too is that the league acknowledges that the quality of play is maybe not the best on Thursday nights, and likes to use those games as a test bed for new methods of pushing games out to viewership. You're never going to see a Sunday game on Amazon because the TV networks would never allow that. Never in a million years. And so to, kind of explore new ways to get the games out to people without, illegal streaming or this or that or the other thing, Thursday night games provide kind of an ideal laboratory for the league, or at least they think it does, which I personally think that the legacy TV networks need to relax their grip a little bit, because I'm not convinced that ratings are actually going down for the NFL. I just think more and more people are cutting the cord, or watching, illegal red zone streams, or, going to a bar to watch the game, than they are, watching at home on CBS or Fox.
Yeah, I don't think the number of eyeballs is decreasing,
exactly.
At least at the moment. Yeah. It just happens to be the way that we tend to measure ratings, which is households. It's just not great. The way that we've changed our viewing habits has changed the way that has materially affected the traditional measures of determining, ratings, right? So, yeah, and when TV networks kind of realize that, they'll maybe they won't, because they can use it as leverage in negotiations. But they should realize that. And they shouldn't think of the NFL product as something that's losing value, because if we find a way to recalculate the total number of viewers in a way that's more effective, then we'll be able to sell ad space better, right? Which is the ultimate goal. But yeah, and also it is like those streaming services like Hulu or Amazon or Yahoo, which did like the international games,
or Twitter, which has streamed a couple of games, oddly.
Yeah, just so weird, and did a pretty good job. They can do a better job of determining the total number of eyeballs.
Exactly.
So like, I don't think ratings are down in a material sense, only in like an effective sense based off of how we're watching.
Well, and it's super annoying because Nielsen ratings are a garbage method for determining eyeballs. And
they are.
They're what the legacy networks use to determine ad rates, and legacy networks are addicted to NFL advertising dollars. Like, those are some of the most expensive ads that they ever sell. And so it behooves them to try and keep the NFL in its, broadcast television box as long as possible. But the league would be better served, and I think viewers would be better served if more of that stuff migrated towards the internet, towards, not even necessarily like Yahoo and Twitter, but even just, CBS.com showing streams, or Fox.com showing streams of games, because then you can get much more, granular information about who is actually watching the game and how many people are watching it. And you can use that information to better target ads. Like, I don't want to see the Dilly Dilly ad 20 times in a row. I don't want to see the same two ads over and over on a streamed version of the game. I want to see, like, as much as we complain about, Google and Facebook, creeping into our lives, at least they do a better job of, targeting ads at us that we might actually want to see, instead of the same Walmart ad with like a dubstep track underneath it over and over and over for 3.5 hours. And I mean, I feel like that kind of targeting would benefit both the ad sellers and the viewers.
Yeah, I've got nothing to add to that. I absolutely agree. And it's really weird how the number of companies that are willing to serve ads on the internet and the ad rates on the internet are just so much lower because they can be targeted. Like, it feels backwards to me. Especially because, like, I mean, I know there's research that indicates that when we watch an ad on video on a computer, it affects us differently than when we watch an ad on video on TV. So I get that there's, like, potentially some research. I don't even know which direction the research goes, but potentially some research on why ad rates are different. But I still think it's wildly imbalanced against internet content creators and internet streamers in a way that will correct itself once we get more streaming options on the internet. By the way, CBS does do, and NBC has had internet streams, so they have the technology to do it.
Yeah, NBC streams Sunday Night Football, and it's great.
Right. It's great, and you can change the cameras. I love it. And despite that, like, we're not, like, counting them, and it's just weird.
Well, so
like CBS does friggin' the Final Four, the March Madness tournament. A lot of it you can only catch on CBSSports.com, like, and they do a really great job.
Yeah, and so to me, the big difference between, like, broadcast TV ads and internet ads, and the reason for the cost disparity is if you have 1 million people watching CBS, then that ad space is scarce. You know, those 1 million people are going to see one ad to the exclusion of all others. Whereas on the internet with targeted ads, there's no scarcity. You know, 1 million people could see 2,000 different ads depending on the way they're targeted. And so there's, you know, less of a bidding war necessary to get that scarce space because it's not as scarce. And that's my last thought.
Those are our thoughts
on media criticism. The playoff picture, as a consequence of the Thursday night game and not the way people watch it, is significantly different. Injuries have left the Rams and the Vikings in a suddenly very comfortable position atop their divisions.
Yeah,
and Detroit winning didn't hurt
Rams-Vikings
either.
showdown in a couple of weeks.
That's is that going to be a playoff preview?
I think so. I think it will. They had to have made. I think in order to flex that game, they have to have already made that decision, and they haven't. But I was kind of surprised it wasn't. Then I looked at the games that were in the primetime games, and I can understand, even though they're not as. I think one of them is that Patriots Raiders game in Mexico City, so I can understand why that wasn't flexed. But yeah, I don't know. It's going to be a good game.
In other news, Willie Beavers back on the practice squad.
Oh, promoted then demoted, as it were.
It's a shell game with the roster nowadays. And speaking of the roster, did you hear Teddy Bridgewater's back?
Who?
Teddy who?
Yeah, never heard of him.
TB what? Well, I have heard both that he is good and terrible. And I think people have been, like, projecting their own hang-ups on him on Twitter and Reddit for weeks now. But it's official. He's activated. Sam Bradford needs surgery, has apparently spent a bunch of his own money trying to avoid it, but it could not be avoided, and he is now on injured reserve.
I'm kind of surprised the team didn't cover that. But it's not like Sam doesn't have money to burn.
Well, no, so, right? Sam Bradford, amazing capitalist, mediocre football player. But, like, so that makes me wonder about the nature of the treatments that he was getting. Like, is he going full Tom Brady? Is he, like, hanging out and doing the no nightshades thing, or what?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it was, like, Kobe level, not tested science stuff.
Like crystal healing?
Yeah. Platelet injection, but you can only get it in Germany, like that kind of stuff. I am curious about it because clearly, like, the team wouldn't cover it, and, like, you know, props to Sam for, you know, wanting to play. He's always been, like, a competitor, and he's pretty tough in terms of his attitude and approach to football. Clearly, his body doesn't match his mental toughness, which sucks. But it did make the decision easier in terms of who to move off the roster. So, silver lining among a pretty big cloud, that Teddy Bridgewater gets to be on the roster without a material effect on who gets to be sort of active on game day and stuff. So, Teddy Bridgewater on the roster, great. Like you said, he's either great or terrible, depending on who you ask. I have seen people imply that he was terrible by calling him average, which I think is just amazing. Like, he's average. He should be a backup. And it's like, what? That doesn't follow. I was listening to a podcast today that was that actually just made that argument, like, oh, he's a remarkably average quarterback. Vikings fans are getting way too excited about him. He's a good backup. And it's like, you mean he should start? Like, not necessarily for the Vikings, but abstractly. Like, he should start. Like, it makes him not a backup if he's average. Like, I just don't get it. But I don't want to be like, we're in a society where, but it really does feel like the way that we talk about football is when we call something average, we're calling it bad. And that's so annoying to me. Like, man, he's average. Like, yeah, you got to have some average players, like, by definition.
What's so funny to me is that, like, the kind of people who will use average as an epithet are generally, and this isn't always true, but they're generally the first ones to turn around and say that quarterbacking in the NFL is just terrible. All the quarterbacks are too young. None of them are any good. Blah, blah, blah. Everything stinks. Colin Kaepernick shouldn't have a job, but Jacoby Brissett should. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't have, like, the logical consistency that you would hope for. But, I mean, when is sports fandom ever, like, internally consistent?
Right, yeah. Okay, so in order to, like, kind of address this, so, like, I wrote a piece about why Teddy should start. Read it. It's at zonecoverage.com. Clicks get me money. Please click. But short summary is, I think that one of the things that, so Case Keenum has obviously been playing to a level that allows the Vikings to be 6-2. I don't think that he's playing well. I think that the rest of the team is kind of pulling him along, but I don't think, I want to compliment Keenum, right? Because he's playing way above a level of a backup right now. He should start somewhere next year for a team.
None of us ever expected him to do this well.
Right, exactly. And, props to him because he's way outperforming his expectations, way outperforming his contract. That's who you want in every player. You want every player to outperform his contract, and he's not just doing that, he's doing that in spades. Fantastic. But he is not playing at the level of an average quarterback in the NFL, even if he's playing at the level above some of the worst starters in the NFL. And because of that, even an average quarterback, which purportedly Teddy is an upgrade over him. And I think that when you take into account the context in which all these statistics occur, you absolutely have to give Teddy a chance because he could be the same quarterback he was before and still produce a lot more for the offense. There are some, like, the players think that he's better than he ever was. Dial that back. But I think that he'll produce better statistics, and there's a couple of reasons why. One isn't in the article. I'll mention that here, and a couple of are in the article. But I think it's not an accident that the single best game of either of Sam Bradford or Case Keenum's careers have been with the Vikings this year, with Pat Shurmur as the coordinator, Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs as the receivers. And yeah, Dalvin Cook was the running back in those games, but you still have a pretty effective running situation and a better offensive line for the Vikings than we've had since probably 2009. Just phenomenal supporting cast across the board. So if we take a look at the quarterbacks and their careers, they've played better this year for the Vikings than they ever have, ever in their career. Why wouldn't that also be true for Teddy? I don't understand why people are comparing Teddy's 2014 or Teddy's 2015 against Case Keenum's 2017 and assuming that Teddy will continue to play at that level when Case Keenum has never played at this level in his life for the Texans, certainly not for the Rams, and probably not even at the University of Houston. Like, he's been, I mean, statistically way better at the University of Houston, but like, he's been playing at a level that statistically is producing such good outcomes that you have to assume that a lot of the change has to do with the coaching staff and the supporting cast, and Teddy gets to benefit from that. I have no idea why you wouldn't bring that up. And so that is just, it's outrageous to me that that's the case. And if Teddy's worse, here's the secret, you don't have to play him in the playoffs. If he doesn't improve over the course of the second half of the season, you can go back to Case. The idea that momentum, game-to-game momentum exists for Case Keenum is absurd for two reasons. First, there's no evidence of game-to-game momentum. I think Bill Barnwell goes too far when he argues against momentum in football games. I've outlined my thoughts on momentum, and I think it's too player specific to be captured in a lot of statistical evidence, but to some degree can exist in some situations. And it's how humans kind of just respond to events. It's an emotional game, fine. But game to game, those things tend to kind of even out a lot more and reset a lot more. And Case Keenum has already demonstrated that he has no concept of game to game momentum. In games where he's played for the Vikings this year, he has been wildly inconsistent from one game to the next. He had a phenomenal game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers after he had a terrible game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, had a terrible game against the Detroit Lions, had a very worrisome first half against the Browns, a pretty good second half against the Browns. So, also, let's talk about the Chicago game. He was benched for Sam Bradford. He came in halfway through the game and performed well. He can play cold. That's his job. He's been benched so many times throughout his career. You're not messing anything up by benching
the thing
Case
he's
Keenum.
Best at, yeah.
Yeah, benching Case Keenum for like the 40th time, right? Like, he's fine. So that doesn't make sense to me. And I think that the Vikings should see what they have in Teddy. I think that they need to knock the rust off. He may be rough for a couple of games. I think that roughness won't be all that different from the roughness of Case Keenum's like gross inaccuracy over the past couple of games anyway. And I think he'll only continue to improve. He's got a much higher ceiling. He's a younger player who reads the field better, who has ignored some open receivers in the past, but for the most part does a much better job of identifying which receivers will be open pre-snap and post-snap and getting the ball in their general direction. So I do think that they should start Teddy Bridgewater now just so they can see who they want to start in the playoffs. Because the Vikings, I'm not going to say they're a lock to make the playoffs because we've seen this team just screw it up so many times, including last year.
But the path is a little different this year. Like we've got, like the road is wider for us. We can afford to.
It is wider, and it's not dependent on defensive scoring like it was last year.
Well, so what drives me crazy is I think there's this perception among a subset of fans that since Teddy has been injured, he's been like frozen in carbonite. And when we reactivated him, like we just thawed him out, and now he's like landing in this entirely different team, in this entirely different atmosphere, and has no idea what's going on. And when you talk about the strength of the supporting cast, I think a lot of that has to do, if you talk to the players, they'll say, oh yeah, Teddy is unquestionably our leader. And, he's been there this whole time, if not on the field, as a mental member and like an emotional leader. And
yeah, there's no question that the team rallies behind Teddy. It's not close. It's not Sam. It's not Case. It's nobody but Teddy. The team loves Teddy. It's not like this weird PR thing. It's not what we wish to project on Teddy. It is genuine. The team loves Bridgewater.
Well, and you don't think Offensive Player of the Year Pat Shurmur has been, working with Teddy this whole time and working with the supporting cast this whole time to design an offense that will be as effective or more effective as it's been with both Sam Bradford and Case Keenum, which is to say historically effective.
And people are acting like Teddy only has had 1 week of practice. He hasn't. After he gets off the pup, he gets to practice full participation practice. Even if he's not technically on the roster, he practices so for the last 4 weeks he's had practice. And guess what? While he was on PUP, he does get to practice as part of his rehab. And so he had reps with his teammates, with Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs, like throwing the ball to them. And so he's had more practice than just those 4 weeks. So they've been able to incorporate him into the offense. They know what the offense should look like. I mean, obviously they don't completely know because you have to figure out what happens at game speed, but they have a pretty good idea.
Well, yeah, and I think when you say knock the rust off, people have this interpretation of it that, like I said, he's been frozen in carbonite this whole time, and, we're getting the same quantity that we had, a year and a half ago, the last time we really saw Teddy do his thing. And that just is not true.
Right. I mean, I know that the preseason is always like, it's the preseason, but I mean, Teddy Bridgewater was so good in the 2016 offseason, like in training camp, in OTAs, in the preseason. Like, he was legitimately, good. And the thing is, take a look at Teddy Bridgewater at age 22, compare him to the age 24 seasons of players like Derek Carr and Carson Wentz and see where they've gone. And now Teddy Bridgewater is entering, I think his age 24 or I think age 25 season. Yeah, he turned 25 the day of this recording. Happy birthday, Teddy. Which that's kind of cool. But I mean, he has so much room to grow, and he's already been pretty good. So I don't know.
I think we've got our show title.
Happy birthday, Teddy.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, shall we turn our heads toward the game preview?
Yeah, let's do it. Wow, this is a long episode.
I know we're going back to our roots. This is going to end up being like, and we've got a decent mailbag too. This is going to end up being like 2 hours and 20 minutes. Listeners, if you have finished your commute, pause now and then save the rest of this episode for your commute home. If you need a restroom break, pause now. And we're back. So there was a great thread on Reddit. I think it was posted by a Redskins fan. And we were hoping to have a guest this week, but it ended up not working out. So I guess I'll pose the question to you, since I did not see your reply in the thread. Can you flim-flam the Zim-Zam?
You cannot flim-flam the Zim-Zam, especially not a Washingtonian.
If there is anyone who is least likely to flim-flam the Zim-Zam, it's Jay Gruden.
Exactly. He knows Gruden. He knows what he's working against. Not a problem.
He is who the Zim-Zam thinks he is.
Unflim-flammable.
Unflammable, less flammable.
Well, let's talk about Washington, because they're a very confusing team, and they've been made all the more confusing by the fact that there's only one injury designation because there's no longer a probable designation, and they've got like friggin' 12 players that are questionable for the game.
Yeah, functionally, the entire team is questionable, and one thing that I found curious about the Redskins is that they have lost every game with a team that has an above 500 record, except for a super fluky game at the beginning of the season against St. Louis, and another super fluky game against Seattle that they barely won.
That Seattle game was wild.
Right? So what does that say about the Redskins as a team? I mean, they're super banged up. You know, they've got, 9 guys with questionable designation this week, and they're less banged up than they've been the last few weeks.
Right. Okay, so we're in a really weird situation. So they've got 2 tight ends that are questionable to play, Jordan Reed and Niles Paul. That one doesn't matter as much, mostly because even though Jordan Reed is very talented, Vernon Davis has been doing really, really well at tight end. I think he currently leads the league in yards per reception at like 38 years old. Welcome to the Terrence Newman category. That's amazing. But yeah, it feels like Jordan Reed might play, but he was listed as did not participate in the most recent practice, so it probably won't happen. Niles Paul is in the concussion protocol. He could still get cleared by the time the game starts on Sunday, so that's something to watch out for. But I think sort of the most interesting things are what's happening at wide receiver with Jamison Crowder. I was talking to a couple of Redskins people. They think there's a more than 50% likelihood that he's going to play, but not a significantly more than likely chance that he's going to play. So that would leave you with Terrell Pryor, who's been having a poor season this year. I think Washington's using him very poorly, and Josh Doxson, who has magically appeared as a very effective player over the past couple of weeks. The guy that Vikings Twitter member and my friend Luke Inman pined for in the draft until Washington took him almost inexplicably, but I guess they were prepping for letting go of Deshaun Jackson and whatnot. That's kind of a weird situation. I think Jamison Crowder, if he's healthy, really complicates things because he's an effective player that's actually done a pretty good job, along with Pierre Garçon, of getting open against Xavier Rhodes, one of the few cores of receivers that have been able to do that. But you've got a completely different set if it's just Terrell Pryor and just Josh Doxson. I don't think Doxson has enough experience or Pryor has enough experience to get open against Xavier Rhodes. Trey Waynes is kind of an interesting question. Terrell Pryor is probably only going to be used as a deep threat. But I came across this post at hogshaven.com, pretty good piece about how the Redskins were much, much more aggressive last year than they were this year, and how they were kind of halfway in the league in terms of how deep they were throwing the ball, and this year are kind of near the bottom of the league in terms of throwing the ball deep. But they've had a couple of games where they did throw the ball deep, and it's been kind of effective for them. So that's something to kind of watch out for if they want to become more aggressive. They'll be using the deep ball capabilities that Josh Doxson captures by winning at the catch point, and that Terrell Pryor captures by having a lot of speed. And that's something to watch for. The real thing that I'm concerned about offensively for the Redskins is kind of what happens with their offensive line. Moses Morgan has either an ankle injury or 2 ankle injuries. I'm not sure. But he's listed as questionable. He had limited participation throughout all of practice. My feeling on it, based off of what I'm reading, is that he's probably not going to play in this game. That opens things up for Danielle Hunter. And the other tackle position is really interesting. So everyone knows that TJ Clemmings played left tackle for the past 2 games for Washington and has been predictably just as bad. And Everson Griffin, who's had experience going up against TJ Clemmings, would have the ability to really exploit that. It's really the best case scenario would be Everson Griffin goes up against TJ Clemmings, might get 4 sacks. I know we kind of snubbed him in the award ceremony a lot. He's playing really, really well. I don't want to kind of understate that.
That would give him like sacks to spare on his 20 sacks on the season goal.
Yeah, exactly. So it would be cool for him to get, a 4 or even a 5 sack game against TJ Clemmings. But that has been put into question because both Tynasecki and Trent Williams, so Trent Williams, Pro Bowl level player, Tynasecki, probably one of the best undrafted offensive linemen we've seen in a while, are questionable. And some people are saying that Tynasecki actually has a pretty reasonable chance to play. I don't think Trent Williams has a super reasonable chance to play. He was on the sidelines early this week. But he's obviously he's a really good player. And so, that's something to keep track of. Tynasecki had a core muscle injury. He had surgery, I think, about week 6, and he could be recovered to play. Trent Williams might kind of force himself onto the active roster. So they're going to see how good his knee is on game day. And if he feels good, he'll play. And, he's a pretty tough player. So he might just do that. But if he does, that might not be a good thing because if his knee is actually not good and he just says it's good, Griffin may be able to exploit that with power moves, which, he's really good at. So we'll see what happens there. Brandon Sheriff, who has been playing at guard for a while, was injured for the past couple of weeks. He's questionable. Sounds like he may not play, not sure. And Sean Laval, who has, I think, been his replacement, is probably going to play. He's listed as questionable. He had a stinger on his hip, so sounds like he's going to play. But yeah, crazy. It's so difficult to navigate sort of everything that's happening here. But offensively, I think the interior of the Washington offense, especially the other guard position at the center position, are exploitable. I think Linval Joseph will have a really big impact on the game. I am generally worried about Chris Thompson. I just kind of have these flashbacks with players like Theo Riddick, and I was worried about Tariq Cohen too. Players like that exploiting the Vikings. They've been doing a better job this year of shutting down on those types of running backs, but still kind of worried about him. First couple of weeks of the season, he did really well. I think he's still doing pretty well as a player, but the rest of the running game is just not getting moving, and they don't really have the ability to move up the middle. And so I think Linval Joseph will have a pretty big impact on the game. I think Danielle Hunter, no matter what happens, is going to have a pretty big impact on the game. Just kind of curious about what's going to happen with Everson Griffin. That receiver core really good, but Kirk Cousins has been kind of a volatile player. I think he's not playing as well as statistics show, and I think he's got the 3rd best passer rating in a clean pocket and like the 17th best passer rating under pressure. And so if the Vikings can find a way to manufacture pressure, I think that's probably going to be it for the Redskins offense. And I know we say that about every quarterback, but I think it's more true of Kirk Cousins than it is to most quarterbacks. So that's kind of my read on that offense.
Well, so there's an article on Redskins.com where Jay Gruden talks about how most of the offensive line has experience playing at both center and guard. And the article goes on to describe how Naseke and Williams are probably unlikely to be on the field together. Like one might be used in place of the other. And the impression I get from the article is that they would rather let Williams have more time to recover from injury. But I think the major takeaway is that it's going to be, probably even within the game, a rotating cast of characters on the Washington offensive line, which, given that Cousins has been sacked 16 times in the last 3 games, is probably a good thing for Minnesota, although maybe not as good as it's been for the last few teams to play Washington.
Yeah, it's going to be kind of exciting because I think there's a wide range of not just who plays, but how well they'll play based off of the recovery from injury. Because I guess based off of the article that you that we're going to link in the show notes, Trent Williams actually may not be able to play, but it does sound like they're going to give him the ability to make his injury designation. And if he kind of overestimates himself, that could be just as bad as if TJ Clemmings. Well, it's probably never going to be just as bad as if TJ Clemmings was playing, but it could be pretty bad.
So, given how the game ended, this may be an uncomfortable comparison, but how much do you think the game is going to look like the first half of the Washington versus Seattle game?
Oh, Jesus. I don't know.
Does that make you uncomfortable? Would you rather not see just like a clumsy defensive crap show?
I mean, I'm not like against it because I know who wins at a defensive clumsy crap show. It's the Vikings.
That's true. We and as great as Russell Wilson is in the fourth quarter, we even with Case Keenum have managed to be relatively consistent.
Right. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if this game ends up being high scoring for one reason or the other. But I mean, Washington is such a difficult team to figure out. It's not like the Patriots, great offense, bad defense. It's not like the Eagles, good at both things. It's not like the Rams where it's difficult to find a weakness. I mean, there's not a ton of amazing players outside of Aaron Donald, but there's no major weaknesses. But like Washington, like who are they? Man, I don't know. I have no idea.
Well, okay, so Andrew Sendejo, which I didn't realize how much Andrew Sendejo looks like Ben Affleck.
Weird. He's like a yoked Affleck.
Maybe it's just the beard thing, but Andrew Sendejo is coming off a suspension. How much of a role do you think he is going to play in enhancing the already stellar defense?
I think a pretty decently large one, which I just used two qualifying words, but still. I think he'll play a pretty significant role. I think that, when you've got players like Vernon Davis, you have to be able to maybe not intimidate, because I don't think Vernon Davis is intimidatable at this point. But you have to be able to, close off the options. And a player like a strong safety like Andrew Sendejo, or I guess a close-sided safety like Andrew Sendejo, he can play a pretty significant role in shutting down those passing lanes, just by virtue of knowing where to be and kind of hurting what they have the ability to do. Plus, if Sendejo wraps up, which, flip a coin that day, we'll see, they'll be able to mitigate anything Chris Thompson can do. So, he'll play a pretty big role. It was nice that Anthony Harris wasn't to drop off like he was last year, which I suppose, he could be an honorable mention at most improved. Sendejo's playing really well. So I think that they'll do a lot of those tertiary skill positions like scat back and, backup tight end, that he'll have the ability to really hurt their outlets and safety valves.
Andrew Sendejo, he couldn't go to London.
Womp
womp. So that's going to be...
Hashtag free Dejo.
So that's going to be key in in the unlikely event Kirk Cousins is not just constantly running for his life. Having Sendejo downfield is going to be key to letting Harry Smith, do the things he was doing against Cleveland, appear suddenly from the backfield and apply pressure at the first level, and maybe also help keep the Vikings defense from, getting wrecked when we play man defense.
Yeah, I think so, because I think a lot of the issues I had with the Vikings defense last year and the year before had to do with what happens when quarterbacks turn away from the primary option, because the Vikings did a phenomenal job shutting down like the top receivers that they played against. Thank you, Xavier Rhodes. Thank you, pressure producers. But when that pressure arrives and when that top option is not available, very often we saw the second, third, or fourth options be available and do damage against the Vikings. This year we haven't seen it, and I think that Andrew Sendejo does a better job of making sure that Harrison Smith can freelance like Troy Polamalu, Thank you again to Brett Coleman, who we mentioned earlier in this podcast, for providing that comparison because it's really good.
Follow his YouTube channel; it's so good.
It's so good. But you know, even if he does have a video entirely in praise of Carson Wentz, it's still a good channel, I promise.
That's probably why it's good. He doesn't have the inherent like bias that you display, even in the midseason awards. Not a single mention for anyway.
You didn't win an award. It's not my fault. It's his fault.
You picked the awards. It's all your fault.
If he had played well enough to win an award, I would have picked him.
All right.
But yeah, those second, third, and fourth options are less of an option now because of the improvement of Anthony Barr's play, because of the play Andres Sendejo provides, and yeah, the improvement of play that Trey Waynes provides. And I think Sendejo's a really big part of that, a really big part of making sure that happens, because very often you'll find those kind of safeties up against the pressure valves that offenses tend to have. And he wasn't very good at that 2 years ago. He got better at it last year, and he's even better this year.
Cover 3, single high.
Let's do it.
So on the other side of the ball, just using the Seattle game as a barometer, which, maybe not the best. Russell Wilson, historically great quarterback in motion. And we saw that on Thursday night. He had a play that I have functionally never seen, where he ran almost 30 yards before finally throwing the ball for a long completion. Case Keenum, less like that. So how badly is our offense screwed if Keenum can't find his way out of the pocket?
Less like that. Yeah, Case Keenum isn't a wizard. That's true.
He is definitely a muggle as far as sensing pocket pressure and escaping goes,
and having a psychic connection to Doug Baldwin. Yeah, yeah, it'll be a problem. They've got pretty good edge players. I'm really worried about Ryan Kerrigan, who's kind of one of the more underrated edge players in the league. Especially because Mike Remmers is going to be out. They're going to play Rashad Hill there. Rashad Hill hasn't played up to the level of his one game of play last year, but he's been playing kind of all right-ish, and certainly better than most backup tackles in the league. But I think Ryan Kerrigan will have the ability to exploit him. I think Preston Smith is a dangerous player. Hasn't been as effective this year, but whatever. He's like good, so it kind of doesn't matter. They've also got Junior Gillette, who also has the ability to produce pressure. I don't think any of them are on the injury report, so they'll all be kind of available. They're one of their best interior defensive players, I think, is going to be too injured to play. But Ziggy Hood is not going to, I don't think, going to do too much. And I don't think their defensive interior is all that good. And so the real issue is, Riley Reiff, who's going to play, how he matches up against Gillette and Preston Smith. And how Rashad Hill matches up against Ryan Kerrigan. I think a big part of the problem with the Seahawks in that game is that their offensive line was bad and not that the players they were playing against were good. So the Vikings have that going for them. They are an above-average offensive line, wildly exceeding expectations. And I think their strengths are at tackle, even if you don't have Mike Remmers there. So I think Case Keenum's going to have a little bit more time than Russell Wilson did. But it's going to be interesting because I think D'Angelo Hall's only played one game at safety this year, did pretty well. And we're going to see, if he can continue that, because I have a sneaking suspicion he won't. He wasn't the biggest hitter among the corners, and he was a huge gambler at corner, which got him interceptions, but also allowed a lot of deep touchdowns. And you can't really gamble as much as a safety. You just can't. So we'll see kind of what happens there. Swearinger is a team captain for some reason. I don't really get it. He's not a great player, but this is the best he's ever played. Maybe he's like Andres Sendejo. Huge hits, doesn't let up, doesn't wrap up, and potentially injury magnet. But he's a captain, I guess. That'll be interesting. We'll see kind of if Laquan Treadwell can kind of bully him at the catch point. Maybe not. Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs shouldn't have too much of a problem exploiting Swearinger's coverage problems. The real question is what happens at cornerback, because there are 3 or 4 cornerbacks for Washington who've been playing, I think, a lot better than they've been getting credit for. Josh Norman obviously has been playing pretty well. Switching teams and stuff like that. Quentin Dunbar over the past couple of games has played pretty well. And even Kendall Fuller, who had a really bad year last year, is playing pretty well in the slot. And who's the other cornerback? Not Amerson, Brashad Breeland, who's in his second year, is also playing really well. And they're all good corners. And so I think that the level of play that Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs demonstrate are better than the three of those four corners. Josh Norman might be a better cornerback than those two are receivers. But just generally speaking, I think those receivers have an advantage, but it's not going to be as pronounced an advantage. And that's why I'm kind of worried that even if Washington can't produce pressure like they have in the past couple of games, even if they can't produce pressure in this game, Case Keenum may not be able to get bailed out like he usually does by Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen. So it'll be difficult to sort of pick his poison. I expect bigger games from the running backs, though. The interior is pretty weak, so I wouldn't be surprised if the Vikings decided to actually roll Latavius Murray over Jerick McKinnon, because they like running Murray on the inside rather than they like McKinnon on the inside. And the edge players are pretty decent at defending the run. And so, running Jerick McKinnon to the outside might have less expected value than Murray up the middle. It'll be interesting. But I do think that McKinnon as a pass catcher will probably have a pretty good game because, I think that if there's a weakness of the of that unit, it's the linebacker. Zach Brown is injured. I don't know if he's going to play. And this admittedly is kind of like the best year he's ever had, but he's just generally not been that good of a linebacker. And despite the fact that I kind of loved him in the draft, and Will Compton is just really bad. So those linebackers, and if DJ Swearinger's in coverage, I don't think we'll be able to cover Jerick McKinnon all that well. So he might get a lot of yards from scrimmage, but I wouldn't be surprised if running up the middle, you get more from Latavius Murray.
Well, and the only people confirmed out for Washington are linemen Arthur Jones and Matt Ioannidis. So I think that really opens up the first level game for the Vikings, both, like you were saying, as Latavius Murray as an up-the-middle kind of guy. And, I'm thinking we might see Jerick go off like he did against Cleveland with about an equal number of yards, both from handoffs and from pass catching.
Well, it's interesting because, we had a guest on the show for the Cleveland game who kind of perfectly predicted it. He was like, Cleveland is good at one thing. It's stopping runs only up the middle, and they're bad at everything else on defense. And Jerick McKinnon is good at all of those other things. And so
he did all those
Jerick
things.
McKinnon.
He was everywhere you want to be.
He is the offensive Harrison Smith. Nope, that's too strong.
Jerick Visa McKinnon.
But this game, it's a little bit different because they're a little bit better at shutting down those outside runs and a little bit worse at defending those inside runs. So we'll see if McKinnon goes off again.
Well, they should be, but with injury, we'll see.
They're really bad at stopping runs on the inside. We'll see what happens on the outside, but really bad. And injuries are going to make that worse.
Latavius' chance to recover from honorable mention least valuable player.
Yeah, he could rack up 70 whole yards.
So keep him on your bench if you foolishly drafted him in your fantasy league. Leave him on the bench.
Yeah, think about it, but maybe.
But if everyone else in your team is on bye this week, then maybe.
But I do think that Murray is set to have one of his better games. I will say that.
So, what is your score prediction? Do you want to know the line first?
No, 31-28 Vikings.
Whoa, it is. You
Take
really
the over.
think?
Take an enormous over. I think the over under is like 39.
42.
Whatever. Huge scores, points all around.
Really?
Yeah.
So I'm not convinced that Washington is going to be able to score that many points. I think
that's fair. Reasonable, even.
It seems relatively reasonable. And the Setting the Edge podcast, co-hosted by North Code least valuable player Justice Mosqueda, agrees.
They've got a pretty good record against the spread this year.
Yeah, and they agree that Minnesota -1 is a lock, and the line has moved to a 1.5, but still.
Yeah, that's a weird near pick'em. Like I predicted, I thought a surprisingly close game, and it still covers with room to spare.
Yeah, I think this game is not going to be, well, if it's high scoring, it's going to be a blowout. And I predict a score of 27-13, which would still
also
come in
reasonable.
on the under.
I am so confused by Washington that I was like, anything could happen. I'll pick anything.
Well, hopefully Xavier Rhodes picks anything when Kirk Cousins is forced to throw under pressure numerous times and probably throws while he's getting sacked a couple of times, and we can scoop a pick six out of the deal.
Yeah, Xavier Visa Rhodes.
Well, I'm just saying we are. If last year is any indication, we are underperforming for defensive points scored, and so this is
yeah, we're due.
Yeah, given injuries, this is a great opportunity for some regression to the new mean.
Yeah, I mean, all the analysis I gave indicates that the Vikings should have a really good time shutting down Washington offensively, especially because Cousins really regresses when he's under pressure, much more than most quarterbacks. And there's all the reason in the world to think that there's going to be a lot of pressure in this game. I'm just like, Terrell Pryor's had a bad year, but what if he has a good game? I don't know, man. I'm weird about this game.
All right, so Vikings and the over. It's the
yeah,
the official, but bet all your Germajesties on
right.
Vikings and the over.
My official sort of Germajesty wager was in certain locations. I didn't pick an over under. I only picked Vikings 1.5. But who knows? But I mean, that's the only place I'm putting my money where my mouth is the Vikings covering, not the over under.
Well, and then you're right. That's just such a weird pick'em. Like, I wonder what it's going to end at on Sunday. I wonder if we'll be a full-on 3-point favorite by then.
Also, I wonder if there's just going to be weird special team stuff that happens that brings it close, and people are going to be like, Vegas knew. It's like, no, there's no way they could have predicted that. That's just things. People give Vegas way more credit than they probably should.
And with that, shall we wrap up the preview and attack the mailbag?
Yeah, let's do it.
The mailbag attacked us this week. Well, one question in particular attacks you.
Yeah, I regret having read it, but I did keep my promise of not thinking about it.
Hopefully I was able to distract you over the last hour and 45 minutes.
Dusty Visa O'Connell.
I'm everything you want to say. Thomas Addison writes in with a question via the email. You can email us your questions at norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. Being that Bradford has barely played this year and has the potential for injured reserve, that potential has been realized. How do the draft pick escalators work? If we were to win the Super Bowl, would we still have to give up a second-round pick?
I think it would. I think the condition was only for last year. I'm not confident, but it is independent of whether or not Bradford is active. So if it's over the course of his contract, then yes, we would have to give him we would have to give up a second-round pick. But I think the escalator was only for last year, so I think it's locked in as a fourth-round pick. But good question. Maybe I'll investigate it more.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Mike Raver writes in, who should I start in my OP slot, Keenum or Matt Forte?
Man, I love 2 quarterback leagues, but I don't know how that's an option. Matt Forte scored a bunch of touchdowns in a game that Elijah McGuire blew up and kind of established his role for the Jets, so that's really weird. Forte has never been a touchdown producer, but that's where the bulk of his points came from over the last 2 weeks. I would go with Keenum, I guess.
Yeah, I think you got to go Keenum.
Quarterbacks always score more. Just go with Keenum.
Yeah. Anton Koshkarev writes in, do you believe in the theory that the smellier the cheese, the better it is? #Gorgonzola.
Very generally. It's got a clear positive correlation, but it's kind of loose. But I mean, the smell usually has a lot to do with the amount of microbial activity present, and that's a result of depth of fermentation, and that produces stronger flavors in the cheese. And stronger flavors aren't necessarily better, But they're much preferable, I think, in a lot of cases. That's not to say mild cheeses are bad, though. So I think it's like a loose correlation that is certainly not 1-to-1.
Yeah, depends on your cheese desires. I am totally willing to get down on some Trader Joe's smoked Emmentaler, which is like the most boring fancy cheese you can eat, but it's so good. I would rather
it's like the
have
Swiss national cheese, isn't it?
yeah, but this is like barely that. This is like the low rent version, just like everything at Trader Joe's. So to me, I would rather have a cheese that is smellier with smaller veins than a cheese with giant blue veins. Just because I don't like the like astringency of like the leftover mold inside like a big blue vein, like when you cut into it and the piece of cheese just like falls apart because it was held together by mold.
Right.
So I guess yeah, loose correlation. Not 1-to-1, but definitely positive.
Right.
Don from Ohio writes in, what is a worst case scenario for Arif? Wentz winning the Super Bowl in US Bank Stadium and Arif is forced to present Wentz the MVP trophy after the game? Or
my heart.
Or Arif is forced to eat turkey every day for a year without using any sauces or gravy on said turkey.
So I read like 3/4 of this question and came up with my answer, and then I read the last part of the question, and I was like, man, you friggin' really good question, because I'm just like, I'm heartbroken by it. Like, it's the conditions afterwards, right? It's the I have to give him the award and the I can't use sauces or gravy. Like, it's those things that really drive it home. Like, Wentz winning, that would obviously be bad for my brand. But, like, that happens. But I have to give him the MVP. That's awful. That's terrible. Turkey, I don't like turkey. It's trash meat. But usually my stance is it's the least good of a bunch of good proteins. But no sauces or gravy? Man, I trust myself to cook, but I don't trust myself to make turkey perfectly every day. You can make turkey moist. You can make turkey taste reasonably good. But if you don't have a backup plan, I mean, it's got a narrow window of success. No sauces or gravy. That's tough. I'm going to go with the turkey, but I hate you. I hate you, Don from Ohio.
Wow, that's not what I thought you would say. Although, so there's no stipulation.
Part of it is that I trust myself, right? I trust myself to like sous vide a turkey, right, or spatchcock it so that it's appropriately like moist on most days. Like that's, I can just get an acceptable, and I can eat other things on the same day, right? I just have to have turkey once that day, right?
But there's no stipulation that you cook every turkey that you eat. And I imagine you have days where you don't.
I'm going to go out to eat, and I'm going to have to order turkey, and I'm going to ask them to hold the sauce or hold the gravy. And I'm going to kill myself.
You're going to cook 2 delicious meals for yourself early in the day, and then it's going to be evening, and you're going to go out, and you're going to be like, well, hell, now I have to have a turkey sandwich with no sauce. And then you're going to end up eating some sawdust.
I'm probably going to have the turkey sandwich for breakfast.
just knock it out real quick.
Yeah, you just have to get it over with.
So, does using turkey in a smoothie count as sauce or gravy? Because if you just like
it depends on what you mix in with the turkey, right? If it's just like superfoods, right? It's like kale and
kale, spinach, frozen fruit, some orange juice, maybe like some matcha powder and chia seeds. Does that count as without using sauces or gravy? Because
I think the fruits and the orange juice do, because it's kind of close to cranberry sauce.
Ah, damn it.
But if it's like kale and chia seeds, then probably not.
Ugh. But there has to be some sort of liquid. Yeah, no, don't do that. There's no Vitamix workaround for that. So I was thinking that this was not.
Speaking of, by the way, I just have to share this. So Vice has a series on YouTube called Munchies, or has a subset of videos under the brand Munchies, which is very Vice.
Munchies.vice.com or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and then in that brand, they've also got a series of videos called Fuel about how athletes eat. There's one athlete, Renee Campbell, who's a bodybuilder, and she has the worst food. Like, there are other bodybuilders on Fuel that have much better food, but she's like, I've got to have a predictable amount of nutrients every day. I got to know what I'm eating. So she has the same food every day, and it's boiled cabbage and chicken made into a smoothie every day. I hate it. It makes me want to throw up.
So if you want some genuinely terrible food takes from otherwise outstanding people, read up on how the Gracie family treats nutrition.
So here's an interesting thing. They do have a Gracie family member on Fuel.
Which one?
But he like clearly departs. Well, it's not one of the good ones.
Well, yeah, he's gone off the reservation because the way that like Henzo Gracie teaches everybody to eat is ludicrous. It is like sucking all the joy out of life. No wonder they're so violent.
Yeah, this dude likes what he eats is the difference. So he's clearly not one of the... I mean, by the way, not one of the good Gracies. There were like 22 in the first generation, and they like all had kids. So there's a lot of Gracies. But yeah, I mean, he's a vegan UFC fighter, but he like enjoys pseudo-vegan. He does eat sushi, I think. But I mean, like that alone, the fact that he eats sushi separates him from like the rest of the Gracies.
Well, if he doesn't eat cream cheese, that also separates him from the rest of the Gracies, which is like, I don't know. That's we're getting away from the core of the question, and I thought you were going to pick the Super Bowl trophy or the MVP trophy for sure. But then I stopped for a second and I thought about all the pictures of you presenting the trophy.
That's exactly. It's the pictures of me presenting the trophy.
Because I thought it would be just like a one-day thing where, you know, you had to, to me, it was a choice between doing one terrible thing or doing like a bad thing every day for a year. But once somebody takes a picture of you presenting Carson Wentz the MVP trophy, that terrible thing is forever.
That's it.
Like you would be the next crying Jordan.
I mean, what I would need to do is I'd need to like, Rabbit from 8 Mile. I need to own it and make it my Abby. But I still, like, I think that neutralizes it a little bit. But I still, like,
do you want to own that? Like, if you just eat turkey for breakfast every day, then you're good.
I mean, if in that situation, I'm choosing the turkey option. But in the situation where I'm forced to give the MVP trophy, I have to own it. I can't hide from it. It just gets worse. It's like the first rule of Scandals. Let it all out at once. Make it your Abby.
I would let myself be scandalized even further. Like I would just set the MVP trophy on the ground and walk away. Like
piss on it in a little.
You want this? You pick it up.
No, because then you're a poor sport, and people will just tweet at you like, poor sportsmanship from Arif Hassan. Which, like, I am a poor sport, but I don't want people telling me that.
Well, see, that's fine. Like I am willing to own that more than I am willing to. I mean, not that I have as much of an issue with Carson Wentz as you do, but were I in that situation with somebody that I despise as much as you apparently despise him, I would rather take the razzing because that'll go away. Like no negative press ever lasts that long.
Doesn't it? You should see my mentions.
Well, RIP your mentions forever.
Right.
But that's not news.
It's just the most hate I've ever gotten is from Eagles fans, and I continue to receive it at least once a day.
Oh, the Eagles are great, but Eagles fans are pretty bad. They might be the second or third worst.
Right. Man, those tweets, man.
Twitter's a sinkhole.
I'm just glad you can't throw batteries through Twitter.
Ha! Not yet.
Right, just, yeah. Next update. We've brought you exactly what you wanted. Thanks.
Exactly. They're going to verify a bunch of white supremacists, and then when people complain, they'll be like, well, now you can throw batteries at them.
Thanks, Twitter.
Thanks.
Still can't edit tweets.
Yeah, thanks. Kyle Segal writes in, is it time for me to panic over Griff's foot yet?
Nope, he's going to play. So Zimmer said he was going to play.
Zen Cupid writes in, thoughts on starting Teddy versus Detroit as the first game back? I feel like it may help negate a quote-unquote short turnaround of a Thursday game.
I get it. I want to start Teddy as soon as possible. I want to know what he has. I want to shake off the rust. I want to figure out if he's a viable playoff option. If he's not, you go back to Keenum. And I think it clarifies things a lot sooner.
Yeah, we went over this. That was relatively exhaustive. Follow-up question, what was the best 280-character tweet you've seen?
Maybe the Cookie Monster tweet? Did you see that?
Yes.
I haven't seen that many good ones.
Well, I'm still going to stick with my original answer when I agreed to take this question, which is none of them.
The Cookie Monster tweet was fine, though. It was just a bunch of cookie emojis spelling out the word cookie, which tells you how bad all of the other ones are.
Yeah, and the 280 character thing is just like pointless, and it's not as pointless as the 50 character display name.
Oh my God! Why? Why the 50 character display name? Why?
Well, because
I don't want an aim away message as my display name.
Well, you can't cram enough white supremacist like dog whistles into a normal display name or 160 characters. How are you going to get verified if you don't? Whatever.
True.
Whatever. Skull, who is actually Jesse Silbaugh, writes in, would Washington be better just playing 4 offensive linemen rather than throwing TJ Clemmings out there?
That's a really good question. No, because TJ Clemmings is like a speed bump at least. But...
Exactly. You do have to at least push him away first.
Right. Yeah.
If one of those offensive linemen was Linval Joseph, or what if one of those linebackers was Linval Joseph, would that change your...
Like, what do you mean?
Like if Washington had somebody who could effectively, somebody who could effectively block 2 people the way Linval Joseph does.
Right. I've only seen offensive linemen do that, like, very rarely. Joe Thomas, I saw do it once.
It's much more rare on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, right.
Is, yeah. But if they had that unicorn, would you rather have some guy blocking 2 guys at once all game rather than throwing TJ Clemmings out there?
Right. Would I rather have a guy block 2 people at a below average level, or have that guy block 1 person really well and TJ Clemmings attempt to block the other person?
Exactly.
Yeah, I'd rather have that one guy block 2 people at a below average level.
Wow. Can we give TJ Clemmings an honorable mention for a least valuable player, even though he's on another team?
But he's provided additional value to the Vikings by being so bad for another team.
Exactly. He is no longer penalizing us. James writes in, that's right, our producer James. How long am I allowed to gut laugh once I beat Don from Ohio in fantasy for my first victory of the year?
Forever. You guys haven't seen it, but every time we ask a question, Don from Ohio, or every time we ask for mailbag questions, Don from Ohio needs to put in a crack about the fantasy teams. I believe Big Bono's all defeated. He's winless in our fantasy league.
Yes.
So that would make it even better.
I am going to take
forever.
No, I'm going to take the opposite tack. I think he should be the what's the guy that runs the law firm in Harvey Birdman? The guy that Stephen Colbert does the voice for?
Oh. Crap.
Can't remember his name, but the correct answer is ha ha. And that's it.
Laugh forever. We're on 2 sides of this.
Kenneth Allen writes in, you never answered some questions from the mailbag from the first London episode. Yeah, people who were there saw me struggle with like multiple phones and tablets trying to get on the internet.
That was pretty funny, actually.
I know.
But yes, that was pretty bad.
I was like, look at me play with my fancy toys. And Steve was like, that's not your fancy toy? Whatever. Kenneth Allen is still wondering how you could eat that jellied eel.
It was good. It was really good. I was surprised.
Really?
I expected it to be like, well, at least I have an experience. It was the other eel that was bad. And it wasn't bad. It was disappointing. But no, I mean, like, eel tastes like fish because it's a fish. And gelatin exists in most animals, and it's like, usually it runs like throughout the meat, interspersed with other things.
No, but it's different with eels. Like eels secrete gel as a defense mechanism.
Right. And it is different, and the gelatin is standalone as opposed to like throughout the thing. But it did make the eel taste better, and the gelatin itself tasted like fresh fish, not like fishy fish. And I was surprisingly very happy with that.
So it was probably like extraneous gelatin. Like they cleaned the eel and put it in other gelatin, not used the like exuded defense gel. Because that's that's how eels defend themselves from being eaten. They spray this gel onto their own skin to make them taste bad.
Yeah, it's definitely not that. It's
Okay.
gelatin. But yeah, the other eel was bad. It was eel in like a green sauce that they called it a stew with mashed potatoes. The mashed potatoes were thin. They didn't have butter in them. They didn't have dairy in them. It was just mashed potatoes. The sauce was super thin and didn't have very much flavor. So we added a ton of salt and a ton of chili vinegar to it, and it was like, all right. But that was disappointing. But the jellied eel was great. Adding chili vinegar to it added to the experience as opposed to covering up sort of the lack of flavor. The jellied eel was great. I admit it looked gross. That's part of the reason I tweeted it. But it was actually genuinely good. It was the other eel that was bad.
Well, I had a couple of opportunities to try jellied eel, and in a rare display of food cowardice, even after the London episode, we went to possibly the most amazing place in London, Borough Market. Oh my gosh. Melted my face. This stall that had every possible kind of fresh seafood, including Scottish prawns that you literally cannot get in America. We sampled just about everything, but bailed on the jellied eel.
Man, it was good. It wasn't like,
I know.
Look at me, I can try new foods good, because the other eel was bad. It was good. It was genuinely good. I was surprised.
Well, no, and I am like firmly, I mean, this is like a relatively new thing for me. I started as a very picky eater in my youth, and now I am firmly in the eat the world camp. But that's one of my only regrets, like food wise in London, is that we never tried the jellied eel.
I think it's because you knew too much about eel, because you thought about the defense mechanism.
Yeah, I freaked myself out. I got too far into my own head about it, and I didn't eat it. And everything else at this seafood stall was incredible. They were the biggest oysters, like literally oysters the size of my gigantic hand, and Scottish prawns and all kinds of like clams. Oh my God, we ate every seafood they had except for the eel, which is a big fail. My only other regret was eating the worst chicken tikka masala of my entire life on our last night there.
Yeah, shock.
Well, no, but this was like...
Sorry, I've got a lot of thoughts about London and its relationship to Indian food.
Well, so there is... I don't know if you UK people like already knew about this and could have warned me away, but there is an Indian restaurant that is very reasonably priced, very close to Borough Market and London Bridge Tube Station. It's like in a basement. You must never go there, Simba. Like the sauce was literally like Chef Boyardee.
Oh God.
Like sweet tomato sauce. It was horrific. It was the only place we ever got like table service. Like normally we got pub service or whatever when we get to restaurants, but it was the only place we got full on table service. And once we got our food, the server never checked back with us, and I assume it's because he knew the food was terrible, and he knew what we were going to say, so he just saved himself the trouble.
Smart man.
Yeah. Alex Goebel writes in, how many fantasy points does Fitzmagic score this weekend to renew the Ryan Fitzpatrick cycle?
Oh, wow. That's really good. That's exactly how it works, too.
At least 35, right?
Another stupid contract and then underplay the contract. 26. Standard scoring.
Okay. So that's what, like 40 weirdo ESPN scoring?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Caleb Arndt writes in, is the Redskins name the most culturally insensitive franchise name in all of sports?
Oh, I'm sure we can find worse ones, but I believe they exist at the amateur and semi-pro level. So,
if not, who takes the cake?
Of the professional top four teams, or of the professional big four sports teams, and I'm saying big four, I'm only talking about men's teams. I'm just not familiar enough with women's teams, but I'm pretty sure the WNBA doesn't have any of them because they're all like abstract concepts except for the Lynx.
Have you ever seen a Lynx?
Actually, I have. Right outside our window in the middle of winter. They're wild animals. Don't approach them.
They are not pets. Well, I mean, you should. Right. I'm of the mind that you should never approach cats at all.
The cats in our house would prefer that.
That's what I'm saying. The cats like it. I like it. I think we've reached détente.
I can't think of one off the top of my head. There's obviously other teams with similar themes, like the Blackhawks, and that one's pretty complicated because it's actually not. A lot of people think it's named after a specific tribe. It's not. It's named after a person, and I don't know. That's weird and complicated. The Seminoles is really complicated because they provide money to the Seminoles that live in Florida, and the Floridian Seminoles are very okay with the Florida State Seminoles using the name, but the Seminoles that live in Oklahoma hate it. They despise it. And either they see the Florida State Seminoles as sellouts who are selling their integrity to let Florida State do this, or they want the money.
Yeah, they want some of that sweet reparations money. Yeah.
Right. I'm not going to speak to what their intention is, but like that does complicate things.
Luckily, North Dakota was able to contain all of that controversy
so,
in one state with 3 tribes over a college. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Now that it's the Fighting Hawks, it doesn't exist anymore, right? We can't even reference it.
We just did.
Oh,
well done.
But yeah, it's got to be the Redskins. It's the only one that's a slur.
I'm gonna go with Utah Jazz.
What?
Because
it's just inappropriate in like a not offensive way.
No, there are no black people or jazz music in Utah, and so to Utah culture, that must be incredibly insensitive.
So it's not the people from New Orleans that are offended; it's the Utahns.
Yeah, exactly. It's the people that they're the ones that have to live with the name.
What would you name a Utah franchise?
Braden, Caden, Jaden, Aiden, Waden.
The Utah Braden, Aiden, Jaden, Cadens.
The Utah polygamists.
That's insensitive. That is technically against the law.
Technically in Utah.
No, I can't think of a thing I would name a Utah. Maybe the Utah Salt Flats. What are the Utah Salt Flats? Drive all over us.
The Utah Snowbirds.
The Utah leads the nation in smog somehow.
What, really?
Yeah. Salt Lake City is the smoggiest city. It beat LA. That's wild.
That's a curiosity of geography, though. Like,
a lot of it has to do with the fact that the Salt Lake City is in a valley, and so smog stays there. But a lot of the fact has to do with the fact that they encourage industry, to put it in generous terms.
The Utah Temple Garments.
The Utah Magic Underwears?
No, that's insensitive.
Yeah, probably.
At least Temple Garments is respectful. Oh my gosh. Well, that's going to do it for this. Oh, wow. Only.
What a way to end the mailbag.
I did that on purpose. That was a carefully curated mailbag. All right. Do you want me to look on Twitter and see if we got another question?
Nah, they're too late.
Yeah. These are all questions other people asked. Oh, Don from Ohio asked, when you posting the podcast? Right now. You just listen to it.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening. That's going to do it for this. I was going to say extended episode, but this is only like 2 hours and 14 minutes. This is like how we used to roll all the time.
Throwback episode.
Yeah, total throwback. Thanks for hanging out with us for the last couple hours. You've got a great story on Zone Coverage about why we should start Teddy right now. Is there anything else that you would like to plug before we bounce?
Nope.
Arif Hassan, Vikings blogger extraordinaire, blogging hard for you. You know where to find him on the Twitter. Once again, if you feel like this show is worth anything to you, and I feel like this was pretty good. This is a show that I hope inspires at least one $5 donation or more, which you can either do in our tip jar at paypal.me/NorseCode or become a recurring contributor at patreon.com/NorseCode. I was waiting on a guest the other night, and she has a podcast that is about as popular, like it's about as many listens as Norse Code does. And she was complaining about how she doesn't make any money at all from affiliate marketing. And I was like, well, just do the public radio model. Just like spend less time asking your listeners for money. And she's like, well, I just feel weird about asking. And I'm like, well, let me tell you, when we switched away from doing stupid Amazon and like FanDuel, we didn't get a chance to do Blue Apron ads. But have you ever heard another podcast that does not have a Blue Apron ad?
We're unique among podcasts for hating Blue Apron.
No, I don't hate Blue Apron.
I know.
It's a good product.
But still.
But I hate affiliate marketing because it's garbage. And as soon as we stop doing affiliate marketing and just like, asking our listeners to support the show they love, it's been amazing. This show can finance itself functionally in perpetuity. Like if Arif were to die tomorrow and I had to cancel the show, we could probably still keep the archive up for years just on the strength of your donations. And that's what I told her. I was like, you gotta just ask them for money. You'll be surprised how much your listenership loves you. I know I was surprised by how much you love us. So please consider a contribution. And yeah, remember, $5 or more gets you a sweet, sweet Norse Code sticker. And I might throw in, I've got this stack of Vikings in London coasters here. I mean, they're papers, so they're pretty much just for show, but I might throw one of those in there too. Why not? And even though I teased the Christian Ponder Lego, I still have those. I haven't figured out what I want to do with them. But anyway, that's going to do it for episode 207 approximately of Norse Code. We will be back early next week with James and Arif recapping our monster win over Washington, and then later that week talking about what it's like being 7-2. But until then, demand excellence. Demand Norse Code. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, or wherever else fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, who can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. Our intrepid producer and occasional co-host James Pagachnik can be found on Twitter at Big Mono or curating the official Norse Code Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. I'm your host with a firm grasp of the obvious, Dusty O'Connell, and my name is my handle on Twitter. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, your one-time donation can be made at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Please visit our website, norsecodepodcast.com, where you'll find links to our Facebook and YouTube pages, along with the episode archive and some other good stuff. And any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be emailed to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. And on behalf of the entire Norse Code staff, thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.